Chapter 442. Just as I thought, no one would dare to fight against such a terrifying giant corpse. Not long after, Suing Tzu woke up from his shock. He quickly said to Jiang Dongqing and the other two, "You two follow me. Since this thing hasn't broken free yet, we might be able to escape. Let's go." After saying that, he took the lead and walked out of the cave. Jiang Dongqing and the others were panicking and followed him without saying anything. After they left, I hesitated. Although I didn't have much hope, there was strength in numbers. If the four of us joined hands, we might be able to escape. I turned around and called the evil sacrificial spirit to follow Jiang Dongqing. When the four corpses of the corpse insect's ancestor appeared, the evil sacrificial spirit stood there and stared at them. No matter how I called him, he wouldn't come back. However, this time, he became obedient and left with me without saying a word. However, from his expression, he was definitely the calmest among us. He didn't seem to be afraid at all. Instead, he had a faint smile on his face. I found it strange, but it wasn't a good time to ask him. I kept my head low as we walked forward while keeping an eye on the vines that were randomly flying above our heads. Every time these vines shook, they had the power of a heavenly master's attack. Although they were still entangled with the rock wall, it was hard to say when they would break and fall. We ran as fast as we could, and soon, we reached the entrance of the cave. The tunnel that connected to the outside world was nowhere to be seen. However, since the entire wall was broken, there were tunnels everywhere. The only thing we had to worry about was the complicated vines. The giant corpse was still struggling, and the vines had broken the wall. After the rocks had collapsed, the vines had formed a giant web. It was easier said than done to pass through this giant web. After stopping for a while, Suing Tzu turned around and looked at the giant corpse. Then, he handed the 4 square sky fans to Jiang Dongqing and asked the fat drunkard to let Jiang Dongqing take care of the eldest senior brother's body. After doing all this, he stared at the giant web of vines for a while. Then, he turned around and said with a serious expression, "The vines are too dense, so it's hard to judge their trajectory. You guys wait here. Old 3 and I will try to cut open a passage. You guys observe the situation. If it goes well, follow us immediately. If it doesn't, we'll come back and think about it." Then, he called the fat drunkard and walked side by side toward the giant web of vines. As I looked at Suing Tzu's back, I couldn't help but admire him. The disciples taught by the old president were all very responsible. Moreover, he mentioned me in his words, and his attitude towards me didn't seem to be as hostile as before. While he was pondering, the two of them had already walked to the vines. With a stomp of their feet, they leaped into the air. Unbeknownst to them, a long sword had appeared in each of their hands. With a sword incantation, the 2 long swords, wrapped in a shocking aura of Taoism, slashed heavily at the huge net of vines in front of them. Although the purplish-green vines were tough, they were completely unable to withstand the attacks of 2 young god celestial masters. Under their slashes, at least a dozen vines in front of them were broken, and a dent appeared in the giant net. When I saw this, I became excited. If the 2 of them could cut through 10 vines, then they could cut through 100. Although the huge vine net was thick, as long as we continued to cut along this indentation, we would be able to force a path out. Suing Tzu and the fat drunkard obviously had the same idea. After exchanging glances, they didn't say a word and flew forward with the 2 swords in their hands. Just like last time, another 10 vines were cut. The 2 of them took a few steps forward. Jiang Dongqing's face was also filled with joy. He carried his big senior brother's body and turned to me with a smile. "Zhou-yi, let's prepare to go over. Fly in the air and wait for second senior brother to cut open the passage. Then, we'll rush over as fast as we can." I nodded. Suing Tzu and the fat drunkard were flying in the air to cut the passage. Jiang Dongqing and I had to fly up as well. Flying for a short period of time was a technique that could only be mastered by those who had reached the celestial master cultivation. Although I had the power of a celestial master, I didn't have a celestial master technique, so I couldn't do it. However, with the sacrificial evil spirit, he could definitely fly me up. This wasn't a problem. Jiang Dongqing and I moved together. When we reached the bottom of the huge vine net, Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard had already slashed for the third time. The effect of this slash was still impressive. It cut many vines in front of us. However, in the process of slashing, one of the vines behind them swung and almost hurt Suing Xiu. Fortunately, he was agile enough and dodged it. After dodging, it seemed that Suing Xiu also felt that the passage was about to open. He turned his head and activated his Dao Qi, urging the two of us to hurry up and get ready to break out. Jiang Dongqing and I naturally didn't hesitate and flew to the depression that Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard had cut open. However, after going up, I realized that the situation wasn't good. Originally, I thought that the vine was just an accident. However, when we arrived in front of it, we realized that the space that they had cut open had many other vines waving over. Although they hadn't completely blocked the space, they had almost blocked it. After a while, I was afraid that the other vines would completely occupy the space. If that was the case, at least Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard could get out first. Jiang Dongqing and I would stay behind. As long as we summoned the snake spirit and Tong Tong, we had 5 heavenly masters here. I was confident that we could cut open another passage. However, the problem was that through the space in front of me, Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard seemed to be in trouble. The huge vine net seemed to be denser the further out we went. Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard continued to slash. However, the vines that were denser were clumped together. Their efficiency plummeted. Each swing of their sword could only cut a few vines. Facing the denser vines, cutting a few vines was better than nothing. They couldn't even take a step forward after swinging their swords a few times. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, I couldn't help but call for the sacrificial evil spirit to stop. I was prepared to observe the situation. Jiang Dongqing didn't have any misgivings and wanted to rush in before the vines closed. I quickly pulled him back. Before I could say anything, Jiang Dongqing said hastily, "Why are you pulling me back? Let's go in and help. I'm afraid that senior brother can't hold on for much longer." It seemed that he had also realized that the situation wasn't good. I shook my head and said, "Their cultivation bases are far higher than ours. Once things go wrong, they have the ability to escape. If the two of us rush in now, we'll only cause more trouble for them." Jiang Dongqing was silent for a while. Then, he passed the square sky fan and big senior brother's body to me. He gritted his teeth and said, "Help me take care of big senior brother. I'll go and help." Then, without waiting for me to react, he lifted his feet and dashed forward. But after he took a few steps, he stopped again. After I stopped him, the vines in the pit had completely gathered together. There was no gap for a person to pass through. Even Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard's figures couldn't be seen. Although Jiang Dongqing had a heavenly master cultivation base, he was much weaker than Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard. He couldn't break through the vines, so he could only stand there in silence. I sighed and asked the evil sacrificial spirit to go with us. I wanted to persuade him to retreat to avoid being hurt by the nearby vines. However, Jiang Dongqing didn't want to retreat. He stood there, frowning and staring ahead. The giant corpse behind us roared louder and louder. The vines in the Tianyin cave shook more violently. Slowly, the vines in front of us became denser. I looked around. With the density of the vines, I was afraid that Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard couldn't retreat even if they wanted to. Moreover, the dense vines had completely blocked our vision. We couldn't see Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard's figures. We could only see the light from the vines occasionally. The two of them were still in the blockade of the vines. As time passed, Jiang Dongqing's face grimaced. Eventually, He gritted his teeth and turned around to tell me that he wanted me to help him take care of eldest senior brother. He wanted to go there and try to save Suing-Tsu and Suing-Tsu. He also said that if something went wrong, if I had the chance, I must send Fong Tianshan and eldest senior brother's remains to the old president. He had made up his mind to die. I wanted to persuade him, but he didn't wait for my answer. He directly dashed forward and crazily hacked the vines with his long sword. I hesitated. The giant corpse was about to wake up. If I couldn't find a way to escape, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to escape death. Should I go with Jiang Dongqing to find a way to meet Suing-Tsu and the fat drunkard? Although my power wasn't good, with the help of the evil sacrificial spirit, the snake spirit, and Tong Tong, it would be much more efficient than Jiang Dongqing. Perhaps I could meet Suing-Tsu and the fat drunkard. As soon as this thought popped up in my head, before I could take a step forward, I heard a fierce roar behind me. Right after that, all the purple-blue vines in the Tianyin cave seemed to go crazy. Their shaking frequency was much higher than before. Even the rocks on the top of the cave cracked and fell. The falling rocks weren't able to harm me, but the frantically waving vines brought about an even greater danger. Not only were Suing-Tsu and Jiang Dongqing trapped in the vines, even Jiang Dongqing, who was standing in front of me, was struck by a vine on his shoulder. His body swayed and he fell towards the ground. In the process of falling, he spat out a mouthful of blood. I didn't have time to think and asked the evil sacrificial spirit to take me there. The evil sacrificial spirit was extremely fast. It was even faster than Jiang Dongqing's falling speed. Not waiting for him to hit the ground, the evil sacrificial spirit grabbed his body and brought him to the ground. When we reached the surface, I first dragged Jiang Dongqing and eldest Marshall brothers' bodies to a place where there weren't any falling rock. Only then did I have time to check on Jiang Dongqing's injuries. There was a deep cut on his shoulder. His clothes were torn, and his skin and muscles were torn. A lot of blood was gushing out. I couldn't help but be frightened. As a cultivator, as his cultivation base increased, his body's toughness would also increase. For example, when the rocks hit my body, I didn't have any reaction. They bounced off my body, and I didn't feel any pain at all. I didn't feel any pain. Jiang Dongqing had a heavenly master cultivation base, and his body was much stronger than mine. However, that vine had hurt him like this. It was really scary. If one vine was like this, then what about Suing-Tsu and eldest senior brother, who were trapped in the vines? Jiang Dongqing's face was pale, but he didn't faint. It seemed his internal organs were also affected. After violently coughing a few times, he grabbed my hand and weakly said, "Quickly, go and see how second senior brother and the others are doing." I remained silent and didn't say anything. Jiang Dongqing became even more impatient. Disregarding his injuries, he pulled my arm and said with a pleading tone, "After all, I still had some feelings for him." After pondering for a while, I couldn't bear to refuse him. I clenched my teeth and prepared to go and see the situation. However, right at that moment the entire ceiling of the cave exploded. Countless broken rocks rolled down. Although I wasn't afraid of broken rocks, I was forced to stop. I called the evil sacrificial spirit to protect Jiang Dongqing and eldest senior brother's bodies. After all the rocks had fallen, I dragged Jiang Dongqing out of the rubble. At this moment, there was no longer a mountain wall above the cave. The light from the outside penetrated through the dense purple-blue vines and shone into the secret area of the corpse insect for the first time. My attention wasn't on the top of the cave. Instead, I raised my head to look at where Suing-Tsu and eldest senior brother were. When the rocks fell, I clearly felt the aura of the Heavenly Master Seal. If I wasn't mistaken, Suing-Tsu and eldest senior brother had already used the Heavenly Master Seal, their final trump card. Although Suing-Tsu's attitude towards me had been cold, I couldn't help but feel a bit of sorrow in my heart. However, this sorrow didn't last for long. I soon discovered another fact. The roars that had been lingering in my ears had disappeared, and the surroundings were frighteningly quiet. What happened? Why did the giant corpse suddenly calm down? I had a strong feeling of uneasiness in my heart, so I braced myself and turned around to look. The giant corpse was still standing in the same place, but his floating posture had changed. At this moment, he was quietly standing on the ground, and the countless purple-blue vines on his body had disappeared. Only a thick purple plant that looked like a root was stuck in his chest. It seemed that the root of the purple-blue vine had been planted in his body. The giant corpse's hands were placed on the thick root. From his posture, it was clear that he was trying to pull it out. Inch by inch, the giant corpse pulled out the purple vine's root from his chest. Although he didn't roar or show any expression on his face, I felt my heart go numb. I didn't know what kind of pain he was enduring at this moment. The more terrifying the pain, the more furious he would be after he pulled it out. Eventually, the purple root was pulled out from the giant corpse's chest along with a black ball-shaped object. Then, an unprecedented deep roar filled the entire cave. Even with my cultivation, I felt a sharp pain in my eardrums. Chapter 443. Feeling the terrifying power of the giant corpse's roar, I felt my scalp tingle. A primal fear rose from the bottom of my heart. There was only one thought in my head, which was to run away. However, I couldn't move my legs. It seemed there was an invisible force binding me to my spot. No matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't move. I didn't know how much time had passed, but the giant corpse's roar finally stopped. Both of his hands grabbed the roots of the purplish-green plant in front of his chest and swung it. Along with his movements, the giant vine net covering the entire Tianyin cave collapsed. Countless vines were torn and scattered everywhere. Even some vines next to me whistled and dashed toward me and Jiang Dongqing, who was still on the ground. Instantly, my heart went numb. I wanted to dodge, but the force binding me was still there. Not to mention using Taoist techniques, I couldn't even move my body. If I can't avoid it, Jiang Dongqing's body might be able to withstand the vines for a while and survive. But I'm not a celestial master yet. I might not even be able to withstand a single vine. While I was panic-stricken, the evil sacrificial spirit jumped in front of me. He didn't seem to be affected. He simply waved his hand and blocked the vines in front of him. From his casual movements after entering the Tianyin cave, he had absorbed the thick Yin energy in this place. His power had increased again. At least, he was stronger than Suing Xiu and the other man. I was afraid he wasn't far from the Yang God Celestial Master realm. After blocking the vines in front of him, he didn't stop. In the blink of an eye, he appeared behind me and eliminated the dangers that I hadn't noticed. The giant corpse didn't stop waving his vines. It was obvious that he hated the vines that bound him to the extreme. Rather than waving his hands, it was better to say that he was dismantling the vines. It was obvious that he wanted to completely destroy the purplish-green plant. Thus, the entire Tianyin cave was destroyed. Countless vines flew everywhere. Not only the walls of the cave, but even the ground was destroyed by the flying vines. If the evil sacrificial spirit hadn't blocked the vines, Jiang Dongqing and I would have been shot and turned into sieves. After the vine net in front of us collapsed, 2 badly mangled corpses fell from the sky. They landed not far from us and made 2 loud thuds. I looked and felt gloomy. Those 2 corpses, whose faces couldn't be recognized, were Suing Xiu and the other man who had been trapped in the vine net. When I sensed that they had used the Celestial Master Seal, I knew that they had no hope of escaping. Now, the giant corpse had gone berserk and completely dismembered the huge purplish-green plant. The 2 people trapped in the middle of the vines were also in great danger. Facing such a terrifying power, it was already lucky that their corpses hadn't been completely destroyed. Jiang Dongqing also noticed the 2 corpses. He struggled to crawl up from the ground. His body trembled as he tried to move over to check on them. However, my body was currently tied up and I couldn't make any violent movements. How could he go over? He struggled to move for a long time, but he still couldn't take even half a step. In the end, he could only sit back down on the ground and stare blankly at the two corpses. He was silent for a long time. Not long after the vine net collapsed, the roots of the purple-green plant in the giant corpse's hand also cracked. At this moment, the giant corpse seemed to have vented enough. He threw the remains of the purple-green plant aside and looked at me. It was the first time I had seen the giant corpse's eyes. After our eyes met, I couldn't help but shiver. The giant corpse's eyes were bloodshot, sparkling with endless hatred and madness. It seemed he wanted to tear the entire world apart. A primal fear covered my entire body. My throat felt dry. I wanted to run away, but my body didn't listen to me. I stood there in a daze. The giant corpse didn't look at me for a long time. Soon, he took action. He lifted his foot and walked toward me. Although I had interacted with Xiao Jin many times after he had transformed, I still felt an endless pressure when the giant corpse walked towards me. The fear in my heart slowly disappeared and was replaced by despair. At this moment, I finally understood how Yan Nantian had felt when he faced Xiao Jin. Although he had the cultivation base of a Yang God celestial master, he couldn't withstand a single blow from the complete Tai Sui. The giant corpse wasn't fast. However, since he was so big, he only needed a few steps to cross the entire Tianyin cave and stand in front of me. The mountain-like Tai Sui stood in front of me. I couldn't even see his eyes. I tried to lift my head, but I could only vaguely see his face. At this moment, the giant corpse looked skeptical. He didn't attack me directly. He just blankly looked at me for a few seconds. Seeing his behavior, I calmed down. I recalled the first time I met Xiao Jin. When Xiao Jin first appeared by the Yellow Spring River, he was as intimidating as this giant corpse. However, when he faced me, Xiao Jin had a warm attitude. He didn't want to hurt me. He even treated me like his family. Although this giant corpse was bigger and his color was different from Xiao Jin's, from his appearance, I could tell that he was the Tai Sui. Could it be that he would be as friendly to me as Xiao Jin? While I was still thinking that I was lucky, the giant corpse looked impatient. He lifted his foot and stomped on me. The sudden change made me dumbfounded. The binding force on my body made it impossible for me to dodge. As I was about to be killed, the evil sacrificial spirit stood in front of me at the critical moment. He didn't use any technique or attack the giant corpse directly. He just roared at the giant corpse. It was strange that after the evil sacrificial spirit roared, the giant corpse seemed to understand something. His face changed, and the crazed look in his eyes disappeared. His bright eyes gazed at the evil sacrificial spirit. After a long moment of silence, he suddenly roared like thunder. Who are you? Hearing his voice, I was shocked. This giant corpse could talk. Compared to the giant corpse, the evil sacrificial spirit's body was extremely small. I didn't know how strong the evil sacrificial spirit was when he was at his peak, but right now, his cultivation base was much lower than the giant corpse's. However, facing the giant corpse, he looked arrogant. He snorted and raised his right hand in front of his chest. A black ball of light appeared in his palm. It's the same power. Don't you recognize it? After listening to the evil sacrificial spirit, the giant corpse was even more puzzled. After a few seconds of silence, his thunderous voice arose again. This time, he asked again, "Who are you?" The evil sacrificial spirit's face was cold. He put away the black ball of light in his palm and turned around. He pointed at me and said, "You don't need to know who I am. You just need to know who he is." Following the evil sacrificial spirit's movement, the giant corpse's eyes turned to me. This time, his eyes didn't have any crazed or hateful look. There was only suspicion and suspicion. He looked at me in silence for a few minutes. Is it him? No, it can't be. After a moment of silence, the giant corpse suddenly faced the sky and roared crazily. Then, he lowered his head and looked at the evil sacrificial spirit. Then, he looked at me and said, "I don't have much time. You guys wait for me here." Then, he turned around and left us, heading toward the energy passage. The heavenly cave was really high, but the energy passage was only around 10 meters high. It was impossible for the giant corpse to pass through. However, he had used his great strength to smash the top of the cave and create a passage made of crushed stones. The stone wall that separated the energy passage and the 4 caves and 8 halls of the corpse sect also collapsed. After the giant corpse passed through the passage, he swung his arm. I saw the buildings in the flying zombie cave not far from us turn into ruins. The cave that extended in all directions had been flattened by the giant corpse, turning it into a huge open valley. Originally, due to the mountain wall's obstruction, I couldn't see far from here. But now, in this vast ruin, my eyes could follow the giant corpse's body. After the flying zombie cave was completely destroyed, the giant corpse continued to move forward and arrived at the purple zombie cave. Just like before, he swung his arm, and the purple zombie cave was completely destroyed. But what was different from before was that the elders in the flying zombie cave had already died, so there was no one left. However, there were many disciples in the purple zombie cave. Following the giant corpse's movements, they were destroyed just like the buildings. Countless broken limbs flew in all directions, and in an instant, the smell of blood soared into the sky. The giant corpse didn't stop and continued to move forward. After the purple zombie cave was the black zombie cave. After the black zombie cave, he didn't let go of the white zombie cave, which was the outermost area. The further we went, the more corpse sect disciples there were. The giant corpse didn't want to let any of them go, and he crushed the entire corpse sect. It wasn't until he reached the edge of his field of vision that the giant corpse finally stopped. However, he didn't immediately turn around. Instead, he reached out with his hand and grabbed a few corpse sect disciples. He casually threw them behind him, and they became part of the broken corpses. He repeated this action several times in a row, forcibly capturing nearly 100 people who had escaped. Then, he finally turned around and came back. On the way back, he stretched out his hands and pushed the countless broken corpses on the ground. He looked like a mantis that was rolling a dung ball. The broken corpses piled up as he moved forward, creating a bloody and terrifying scene. There were thousands of corpse sect disciples, but I'm afraid none of them managed to escape this time. As the giant corpse got closer and closer to me, the broken corpses piled up, forming a small mountain that was almost as tall as the giant corpse. There were also some scattered stones. I didn't know what kind of divine power the giant corpse had, but it was still very easy for him to push these things. When he finally returned to the heavenly cave, the pile of corpses was almost as tall as the heavenly cave. It was even taller than the giant corpse. It was like a mountain of corpses and stones. When I raised my head to look at this bloody and terrifying pile of corpses, I recalled the prophecy that Taoist Master Guan had given me. Zhou Wu, Zheng Wang, all of them are absurd. Desolate grave, flesh mound, and endless Taoist scriptures. Previously, I saw the so-called Zhou Wu, Zheng Wang and the desolate grave in the heavenly fan, but I didn't know what the flesh mound and endless Taoist scriptures were referring to. At this moment, I had an epiphany. Wasn't this pile of corpses a human flesh mound? Chapter 444. I was bewildered as I looked at the absurd scene in front of me. My mind was blank. Ever since I had embarked on the path of cultivation, I had experienced many life and death battles and seen countless corpses. However, I had never seen thousands of corpses piled up together like this. Even the corpse storage hall of the corpse sect didn't have so many corpses. Although cultivators had immortal techniques, they were still human beings. Seeing so many corpses of their own kind, No matter how high their cultivation base was, they couldn't remain indifferent. While I was dumbstruck, the giant corpse hurriedly lifted his feet and stepped into the mountain of flesh. His legs slowly sank into the pile of broken corpses and rock. Then, half of his body was buried in the rubble. I was puzzled. I could say that he had destroyed the entire corpse sect to vent his anger, but now, he was gathering corpses and burying himself in the pile of flesh. I couldn't help but ask the evil sacrificial spirit in front of me, "What is he doing?" The evil sacrificial spirit coldly answered me, "Struggling at death's door." Struggling at death's door? What does that mean? Before I could ask, the giant corpse suddenly roared again. His thick hair suddenly fluttered in the wind and seemed to extend a lot. Then, he inserted his hair into the pile of corpses. When I was at the Yellow Spring River, I saw Goldie's hair connected to countless human corpses. The last time I came here, I also saw the giant corpse's hair connected to human corpses. However, this time I didn't see those corpses. What is he doing now? I asked the evil sacrificial spirit. He shook his head and said, "This is an innate divine ability of the Tai Sui. He can absorb the power of the origin from the corpses. However, he just wants to absorb his own power to prolong his life. Unfortunately, it's all in vain." What is the power of the origin? I asked again, but the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head and didn't answer me directly. "I'll know later." As soon as he finished speaking, the giant corpse suddenly let out a sorrowful cry. The thick hair that was inserted into the pile of corpses retracted. Then, the aura of the entire person suddenly changed. There was no longer the feeling of madness and terror from before. Instead, there was a feeling of despair lingering around him. He was buried in the pile of corpses in a daze, and was silent for a long time. I turned to look at the evil sacrificial spirit. He had just said that the giant corpse's efforts were futile. Looking at the giant corpse's dispirited face, it seemed he had suffered a great blow. I tried to move my body. The power that had restrained me was gone, and the giant corpse didn't move. I thought for a while and decided to ask the evil sacrificial spirit what I should do next. However, before I could say anything, the evil spirit turned around and said, "Follow me." Then, he didn't wait for my reply and walked toward the giant corpse. I hesitated for a moment, then gritted my teeth and followed her. When we stood in front of the giant corpse, the evil sacrificial spirit looked a little sad. He quietly watched for a while before speaking to the giant corpse. "You've lost your power of the origin, and your blood of the heavenly path is gone. How long do you want to endure?" The silent giant corpse finally moved. He turned around and looked at the evil sacrificial spirit. Then, he stared at me and said in a low voice, "Thousands of years have passed. The heavenly path doesn't tolerate us anymore. What else do you want?" Although his words were directed at me, I didn't understand what he was saying at all, so I could only remain silent. The evil sacrificial spirit continued, saying coldly, "The heavenly path doesn't tolerate you, but it doesn't tolerate us. If it doesn't tolerate us, we will change the sky." "Ha ha!" The giant corpse suddenly laughed, a look of disdain on his face. "Change the sky. Ha ha, although I've been trapped here for thousands of years, I know the outcome of that battle. I don't know how you managed to escape, but you've already failed once. Do you still have any illusions in your hearts? Last time, you wanted to borrow the power of the Tai Sui clan. What power do you want to borrow this time?" I didn't understand what he was saying, but I did understand the last few words, Tai Sui clan. This giant corpse really was the Tai Sui. The evil priest suddenly laughed, but he only laughed coldly before stopping. He looked at the giant corpse with a burning gaze and said, "The power of your Tai Sui clan is enough. Why do you need to borrow any more power?" The giant corpse seemed stunned. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "The power of the Tai Sui clan has long since disappeared. There is no Tai Sui left. The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. Don't you see? The origin still exists. How can it disappear? When the giant corpse heard this, he suddenly turned to look at me. After staring at me for a long time, he said, "Right now, or he's too weak." The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head again. "He's not weak. He's just asleep." Asleep? The giant corpse laughed again. "My ancestor is also asleep in the mountain and sea realm. So what if you've changed the world? Aren't you afraid that my ancestor will wake up and take away your essence?" The evil sacrificial spirit continued to laugh coldly, his voice filled with ridicule. "The mountain and sea realm, ha ha ha. If he could take it away, why would he have thrown it away in the first place? The mountain and sea realm, ha ha ha. The mountain and sea realm has long since changed." To me, the two of them seemed to be talking to each other like they were reading some heavenly scripture. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but it seemed like they were arguing. The giant corpse didn't get too worked up, and didn't seem to want to argue with the evil sacrificial spirit any further. Listlessly, he asked, "Why did you help me undo my shackles?" The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. "We just happened to run into each other, that's all. However, now that you've reached the end of your lifespan, after you die, I'll consume your fleshly body. That should help me recover some of my power. As for the remaining shaman chi in your body, I might as well return it to its essence and give it to him." As he spoke, the evil sacrificial spirit pointed at me. I was stunned, but soon understood. The evil sacrificial spirit seemed to be telling the giant corpse to give me his shaman chi. Furthermore, after he died, the evil sacrificial spirit wanted to consume his fleshly body. I couldn't believe it. Even if the evil sacrificial spirit wanted to consume the giant corpse's body, why would he say that? Furthermore, he wanted the giant corpse to give me his shaman chi. That was preposterous. The evil sacrificial spirit's actions were preposterous, but the giant corpse's actions were even more preposterous. He turned to look at me, and after a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "Very well. Since the heavenly Tao doesn't tolerate the Tai Sui clan, everything must return to its essence. However, I'm afraid my meager power won't be enough to wake him up." A smile finally appeared on the evil sacrificial spirit's face. He nodded and said, "It will be of some help." Then, he ignored the giant corpse and turned to me. "Go and sit cross-legged in front of him. He will release his shaman chi for you to absorb. Once you absorb his shaman chi, you will probably reach Heaven Master Realm." I was completely dumbfounded, but when I heard Heaven Master Realm, I was stunned. I asked confusedly, "Heaven Master Realm requires one's mental state to reach a certain level in order to push open the door. Is it really possible to just absorb shaman chi?" The evil sacrificial spirit suddenly looked up at me and smiled. "That door doesn't have to be pushed open. Plus, it's impossible for you to push it open. You can only smash it open." I was shocked. I recalled back to when I'd reached Glory of Consciousness Realm at the back mountain of the Metaphysics Society. In that illusion, I'd heard the voice speaking to me as I faced the river in front of me. "Wisdom can cross the river, ignorance can cross the river. Sages can cross the river, bandits can cross the river. Butchers can cross the river, dogs can cross the river. You can't cross the river." The evil sacrificial spirit had said that I couldn't push open the door, and the voice had also said that I couldn't cross the river. My mind was in a daze as I walked to the giant corpse and sat down. Before I could retract my consciousness, I felt a vast amount of shaman chi enveloping me. Before I could even absorb it, the shaman chi had already squeezed into my body through my limbs. I already had the cultivation of Glory of Consciousness, and my heaven meridian was already filled with shaman chi. Now that the shaman chi had squeezed in, my heaven meridian was about to explode. Compared to the shaman chi that had enveloped my body, only a small portion of it had entered my heaven meridian. If I were to absorb all of it, Even if my heaven meridian expanded by 10 times, it wouldn't be able to handle it. Such terrifying power was far from just heaven master power. Was the evil sacrificial spirit wrong? Could I really absorb such terrifying shaman chi? Chapter 445. There was a limit to the human body. When something reached the limit of what it could bear, it would lead to serious consequences such as a complete collapse of the body. However, at the same time, the potential of the human body was almost limitless. Those who regularly exercised knew that when people exercised, it was very easy for the body to reach its limit. At that time, the body would be abnormally tired and weak. However, after persevering for a while and surpassing this limit, the body would feel as if all of its energy and strength had suddenly returned. This was an example of a person's potential exploding and surpassing the limit. At that moment, I was in the same situation. The endless shaman energy in the surroundings had completely buried me and was crazily gathering in my meridian of the heavens. I had used almost all of my strength to prevent the meridian of the heavens from collapsing. However, the surrounding weapons were much stronger than me. Just as I felt the meridian of the heavens crack inch by inch, and I couldn't bear it anymore, the shaman energy that had squeezed into the meridian of the heavens suddenly shrunk a lot, as though it had instantly disappeared. The pressure that the meridian of the heavens had to bear decreased until I couldn't feel it at all. I was stunned by the sudden situation. After a few seconds, I came back to my senses. The shaman energy didn't disappear, but when it reached the bottom of the vein of heaven, it merged with the enormous shaman energy source stone formed by the 7 stars of knowledge. The sorcerer chi disappeared, but the sorcerer chi source stone grew larger. The shaman aura source stone is the source of the shaman aura in my body. After it is enlarged, it is equivalent to completely absorbing the shaman aura from the outside world and turning it into power that I can use in the future. In other words, a part of the sorcerer chi had been completely absorbed by the nest. Before I could rejoice, the meridian of the sky, which had just become empty, was once again filled with a large amount of shaman energy. The speed at which the shaman energy surged into the meridian of the sky was much faster than the speed at which the shaman chi source stone was absorbing the shaman energy. Hence, the pain from before replayed in my meridian of the sky over and over again. The shaman chi source stone grew bigger and bigger until it occupied half of the bottom of my meridian of the sky. Originally, the shaman chi source stone didn't even occupy 1% of the space at the bottom of the vein of heaven. Now, it's dozens of times bigger than before. Especially with the existence of the Tao Chi source stone in the vein of heaven, the changes are even more obvious. The volume of a shaman energy source stone is directly proportional to its power. In other words, the shaman energy in my body is tens of times stronger than before. Previously, my shaman chi cultivation was already at glorious memory great perfection. Now, I have the power of dozens of glorious memory great perfection gathered on me. However, I can clearly feel that I haven't reached the heavenly master realm yet. The most obvious sign of the celestial master realm was to condense the celestial master seal. Of course, the celestial master seal is only something that appears when the Taoist chi condenses into a celestial master. I'm not sure if this thing will appear when the witchcraft chi condenses into a celestial master. Apart from that, becoming a celestial master was a process of being reborn. Although there was only a step between glory of knowledge great perfection and celestial master, glory of knowledge was ultimately still immortal, while celestial master was already close to being a half immortal. Therefore, in the process of becoming a celestial master, regardless of whether the celestial master seal has been condensed or not, one will have a feeling in the unseen world. However, I don't feel anything at this moment. After absorbing power that was 10 times that of a perfect state of glorious consciousness, I still hadn't reached the level of a celestial master. This wasn't scary. There was a natural chasm between an earthly master and a celestial master. No matter how difficult it wouldn't be an exaggeration. However, what was scary was that even though I had absorbed so much shaman chi, the shaman chi surrounding me didn't seem to decrease at all. It still enveloped me in an overwhelming manner. It was true that humans could stimulate their potential to fight against their limits, but there was a limit to everything. One's potential was almost limitless, but it was not limitless. However, I didn't have any other choice. I could only bite the bullet and continue. Very quickly, the shaman chi source stone continued to grow in size. From occupying half of the bottom of the vein of heaven to occupying more than half, it almost filled the entire bottom of the vein of heaven. At this moment, I finally had a feeling. It was as though a voice had suddenly appeared in the space in front of me, calling for me to walk over. I didn't move, but I slowly closed my eyes. When my eyes were completely closed, there wasn't any darkness in front of me. Instead, it was clear as though I was standing in the clouds. Thick white mist spread under my feet, and the warm sun shone on everything. At the end of the clouds in the distance, there was a huge door that shone with golden light. The voice that was calling for me seemed to have come from that door. I didn't hesitate at all. I lifted my feet and stepped on the mist, quickly arriving before the huge door. As long as I pushed open this door, I would become a celestial master. I would be reborn and transcend the mortal world. At this moment, my body was filled with limitless power. Although the huge door in front of me was huge, I had a feeling that it couldn't stop me. As long as I wanted to, the door would definitely be pushed open. With endless confidence, I walked forward, raised my hands, and pressed them on the huge door. Just as I had imagined, there was a resistance from the huge door. The resistance was really strong, but compared to the huge power that filled my body, it was nothing. I just used a little bit of strength, and the huge door in front of me had a slit. The door was moving. I was ecstatic. Every cultivator had a dream of becoming a celestial master. My dream of becoming a celestial master was about to come true. Just as I gathered all the strength in my body and prepared to push the door open, I suddenly felt my chest and back heat up. Then, two shadows shot up into the sky. One was silver-black, and it came out from my chest. The other was dark green, and it appeared from my back. I lowered my head to look, and my expression changed drastically. One of the shadows was a qilin, and the other was a black dragon. They were the two miaojiang venomous insects that I had planted in my body. Yang Shilong had told me that these two venomous insects were the ancestral venomous insects of Miaojiang. Once they were planted, they would take root in the heart. Usually, they would live in harmony with each other until the person with the venomous insects reached the celestial master realm. Then, the venomous insects would fall off the host's body and be retrieved by the person who planted the venomous insect. When the host died, their cultivation would be taken away by the venomous insect. The person who planted the venomous insects could use the venomous insects to obtain all the host's power. When Yang Shilong had told me this, I had only thought that it was a fantasy. It was still uncertain whether I could become a celestial master in this life, so I didn't care. However, I had never thought that in just a few years I would reach this step. After realizing this problem, my restless heart completely calmed down, and my heart wavered. Was the ancestral venomous insects of Miaojiang really that powerful? If I pushed open the door today and became a celestial master, would I really die, and my cultivation would be taken away by the venomous insects? I was hesitant, but after thinking for a long time, I didn't dare to take that step. One had to be cautious when cultivating. Along the way, I had suffered countless hardships, spent countless efforts, and experienced countless life and death situations. I had gone through so many hardships to reach this step, so how could I be careless? Thinking to this point, I took a deep breath. My hands left the huge door, and I simply turned around to leave. Just as I left the huge door, the scenery in front of me changed dramatically. The thick white mist under my feet disappeared, and the warm sun in my surroundings also disappeared. I slowly opened my eyes, and in front of me was still the ruins of the corpse sect. My body was still surrounded by countless amounts of shaman energy, but it didn't forcefully enter my body like before. Although I didn't push open the door, I could feel that I was only one step away from the celestial master realm. As long as I wanted to, I could step over that boundary at any time and become a celestial master. My cultivation was infinitely close to becoming a celestial master, so the shaman energy couldn't cause me any more confusion. I took a deep breath and stood up. Seeing me stand up, the evil sacrificial spirit that wasn't far from me immediately looked at me. After examining me for a moment, his eyes became doubtful. He opened his mouth and asked, "You? Why didn't you become a celestial master?" The evil sacrificial spirit's cultivation was astonishing. Perhaps he could give me an answer about the ancestral venomous insect in Miaojiang, but now wasn't a good time to ask about it. After absorbing the shaman energy from the giant corpse, I could feel that the vitality of the giant corpse behind me was rapidly diminishing. It wouldn't be long before he died. Before he died, I had a question in my heart that I wanted to get an answer from him. I shook my head at the evil sacrificial spirit, signaling him to calm down. Then, I turned to look at the giant corpse in front of me and asked him in a deep voice, "Do you know how many living Tai Sui there are in this world?" The Tai Sui was the source of shaman energy. Even if I entered the celestial master realm, if I wanted to cultivate in the future, I could only obtain power from the Tai Sui. That was why I had to ask this clearly. The giant corpse's reaction had become very slow. He slowly lowered his head to look at me. After a few seconds of silence, he weakly smiled and said, "Living Tai Sui? My Tai Sui clan is not tolerated by the heavenly Tao. It has long been annihilated. How could there be a living Tai Sui? Even I am just struggling at death's door. I can't be considered alive. There are no living Tai Sui in this world." Impossible. I didn't know about the others, but Xiao Jin was a living example. How could there not be a living Tai Sui? I kept silent for a while, then continued, "I have seen a living Tai Sui." The giant corpse's voice became weaker. He slowly shook his head and said, "There is no living Tai Sui. Even if I have been struggling at death's door until now, as soon as I see the sun, the heavenly Tao won't tolerate me. I will be killed immediately. If the heavenly Tao doesn't tolerate me, how could I live? Even if you have seen a living Tai Sui, I'm afraid he is dead now. Haha. It's time for my Tai Sui clan to die of old age." My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't help but recall Xiao Jin. Why did he leave me all of a sudden? If what the giant corpse said was true, then wouldn't Xiao Jin be? While my mind was in a mess, the giant corpse in front of me couldn't stand it anymore. His big eyes slowly closed, and his mountain-like body slowly fell into the pile of corpses. Chapter 446. After a long time, the pile of corpses finally calmed down, burying the giant corpse. The evil sacrificial spirit came to me. He didn't ask me why I hadn't become a heavenly master. Instead, he walked to the pile of corpses and pulled out the giant corpse's head. Then, he sat down cross-legged and made a hand seal. Then, he quickly tapped on the giant corpse's head. A large mass of gray mist gushed out of the giant corpse's 7 orifices, heading toward the evil sacrificial spirit. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't open his mouth. He just moved his nose, and the gray mist was divided into 2 halves. Both halves were sucked into his body through his arms. Then, I remembered that the evil sacrificial spirit had said that he wanted to swallow the giant corpse's body. It seemed he had used the mysterious Taodai technique. This technique wasn't ordinary. It could even swallow the giant corpse. The giant corpse's cultivation base was terrifying. Although he had been trapped here, his witchcraft energy had turned into Yin energy for the Yin corpse sect to absorb for more than 1,000 years. His remaining witchcraft energy was still much stronger than that of a heavenly master. I didn't know how much power he had stored in his body. If the evil sacrificial spirit swallowed all of his energy, he wouldn't be able to recover his cultivation base. I didn't say anything and just sat down cross-legged. I adjusted the amount of witchcraft energy I had just absorbed while waiting for the evil sacrificial spirit to finish. I waited for 1 day and 1 night. During this time, the giant corpse didn't stop emitting gray mist. I remembered that when the evil sacrificial spirit had swallowed the corpse puppet at the middle stage of the glorious consciousness realm, it had only taken around 10 seconds. If the gray mist represented energy, the giant corpse's energy was tens of thousands of times greater than the corpse puppet's. After a day and a night, the gray fog in the giant corpse's 7 orifices gradually began to disappear. The head that was exposed outside the pile of corpses became abnormally shriveled, and the evil sacrificial spirit finally opened its eyes. It spat out a mouthful of murky air. It seemed that the devouring process had ended. I was a little excited. I walked to him and asked, "How was it?" "After swallowing the giant corpse's power, it should be enough for you to recover your cultivation base, right?" The evil sacrificial spirit didn't answer me. Instead, he made a hand seal and adjusted his breathing for a while. Then, he got up from the ground and slowly said, "The power of the Tai Sui is enough for me to recover my cultivation base. However, with my current ability, I can't digest all of its power. I've only absorbed 10%, which is barely enough for me to recover my cultivation base to that of a young god celestial master." 10% was enough for the evil sacrificial spirit to recover his cultivation base to that of a young god celestial master. This power of the Tai Sui was really overbearing. Then, the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head and said, "Let's not talk about me first. According to my estimation, the evil sacrificial spirit's power should be enough for you to reach the young god celestial master." Celestificial spirit thought of my cultivation base more than it. After he and stood. And he and said, I also shook my head. I told him about the venomous insect technique I had and the situation of the 2 ancestral venomous insects in my body. Actually, even if he hadn't asked me, I would have asked him for help. Yang Shilong had told me that the Kirin venomous insect wasn't incurable. I just needed a celestial master to help me get rid of it. The evil sacrificial spirit's cultivation base had surpassed that of a celestial master. Moreover, he was knowledgeable. It was the best thing for him to do. After listening to me, the evil sacrificial spirit frowned and asked, "What's a venomous insect technique?" I was dumbfounded when I heard his question. Not to mention cultivators, even ordinary people could talk about venomous insects for a long time. How could the evil sacrificial spirit not know about it? I was skeptical and asked him several times. Eventually, I confirmed that the evil sacrificial spirit wasn't joking with me. It wasn't that our definitions of venomous insects were different. It was that he didn't know what it was. I talked and gestured. I told him about the technique that had a strong ethnic aura, including the origin, classification, and forms of venomous insects. After I had been afflicted with the Kirin venomous insect, I had collected a lot of information about venomous insects. I still remembered them. After talking for a long time, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't look like he understood. Instead, he furrowed his brows. I thought he didn't understand, so I wanted to tell him again. However, as soon as I opened my mouth, he interrupted me and shook his head. "I know the meaning of venomous insects, but it sounds familiar. Familiar?" I didn't understand what the evil sacrificial spirit meant. As I was about to ask, he waved his hand and interrupted me. "If that's the case, you don't have to hurry to become a celestial master." Don't have to hurry. I wanted to tell him and see if he could help me get rid of the 2 venomous insects. After all, the celestial master realm was my dream. However, if there was a chance, I didn't want to drag it out. After listening to him, I was a little worried. I thought he hadn't heard the method I had heard from Yang Shilong, so I told him again. After I had told him, the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. We can try to get rid of it, but it's hard to say whether it's a blessing or a curse. You don't have to worry. After I investigate, I will make a decision. I didn't understand what he meant. It's hard to say whether it's a blessing or a curse. Did the old aunt give me some benefits when she cast the venomous insects on me? I thought for a while. At this moment, I had the power of a celestial master. Moreover, the snake spirit and Tong Tong were living in my body. If something happened, the three of us could deal with it. If the three of us couldn't deal with it, even if I became a celestial master, it would be useless. With that thought, I nodded and agreed with the evil sacrificial spirit. I wasn't in a hurry to break through. After we had settled this, I asked the evil sacrificial spirit what he wanted to do next. The relationship between me and the evil sacrificial spirit was very strange. We seemed to be strangers, but at the same time we were very familiar. He hadn't told me his identity yet, but he was very loyal to me. It could even be said that he obeyed me. Maybe I had some doubts about him at first, but after experiencing so much, I trusted him a lot. I could even say that I relied on him. That was why I took the initiative to ask for his opinion. After hearing my words, the evil sacrificial spirit pondered for a while. Then, he told me that he couldn't store the power of the Tai Sui's body for a long time. He had to digest and absorb it as soon as possible. In addition, he wanted to investigate the 2 venomous insects I had. So, he wanted me to leave for a while and let me do whatever I wanted. I opened my mouth but didn't say anything. At first, I thought that the evil sacrificial spirit had recovered his Yang God Celestial Master cultivation base. With his knowledge and means, I was afraid that all the Yang God Celestial Masters in the world wouldn't be his match. With such power, together with the snake spirit, Tong Tong, and I, we might be able to go to Mount Longhu to ask the Celestial Master sect for justice. At that time, I was wronged by those Celestial Masters and was chased all the way. I still hated it and couldn't let it go. If it weren't for the Moe bead and the corpse insect, I was afraid that I would have been killed by the Celestial Master sect. However, at this time, the evil sacrificial spirit was anxious to digest the power, so he wasn't in a hurry. It wouldn't be too late to go to Mount Longhu after he came back. Moreover, even without the evil sacrificial spirit, with my current strength, I wasn't afraid that the people of Mount Longhu would come to find trouble with me. Even if I couldn't defeat the Yang God Celestial Master, I could easily run away and wouldn't have to worry about my life. Thinking of this, I felt relieved. I turned around and picked up Jiang Dongqing, who had already passed out, along with the square sky fan in his hand and the body of the scholarly eldest senior brother. Then, I left along the path that the Tai Sui giant corpse had created. As for the bodies of Suing Tsu and the fat drunkard, I originally wanted to collect them. However, after searching for a while, I found that their bodies had already been crushed by the vines. I couldn't find a piece of intact flesh, so I gave up. On the way out, I hadn't even taken a few steps when I heard a ding sound. It seemed that I had kicked something. I quickly looked down and found that it was the 4 small cauldrons that the ancestor of the corpse insect had taken when he came out of the Tai Sui giant corpse. I had seen 2 cauldrons like this before. One was in the Meizhou Metaphysics Society, and the other was in the Orchard's cellar in Shenzhen. I still had the small cauldron that was found in the Meizhou Metaphysics Society, but the one in Shenzhen was taken away by the Public Security Department as evidence. When I first discovered the strange characteristics of these small cauldrons, I had studied them. Later on, I boldly guessed that these small cauldrons were the legendary 9 prefectures cauldrons. Now that I saw 4 similar cauldrons, I didn't want to let them go, so I quickly picked them up. After carefully examining them, I found that these 4 small cauldrons were exactly the same as the Jizhou cauldron. Only the seal characters on them were different. These 4 cauldrons were Shuzhou cauldron, Yangzhou cauldron, Jingzhou cauldron, and Yongzhou cauldron. Since the evil sacrificial spirit was here, I didn't need to make wild guesses. I gave the cauldron to the evil sacrificial spirit and asked him if he knew what it was. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't take it. He just glanced at it and said, "This is a replica of the 9 prefectures cauldron. It originally belonged to you, so you should keep it. If you have a chance in the future, you must find the other cauldrons so that it will be convenient for you to act in the future." His words didn't make sense. However, I was already used to it, so I didn't ask any more questions. I just told him that I had seen 2 of these cauldrons before. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't mind. He just told me to take good care of the 5 cauldrons that I already had and to find the one in the Shenzhen police station. As for the remaining 3 cauldrons, I had to find them if I had a chance. However, I wasn't in a hurry, and there was no need to search for them. From his expression, I could tell that it wasn't a bad thing. I nodded and didn't ask any more questions. I followed him and left the corpse sect. The 800-kilometer-long Taihang Mountains were slightly less majestic, but they weren't lacking in length. With the speed of the evil sacrificial spirit and I, it took us a long time to walk out of the mountain range where the corpse sect was located. Just as we were about to continue walking along the mountain road, the evil sacrificial spirit suddenly waved his hand, signaling me to stop. Before I could ask anything, I looked up and saw 3 figures floating in the air not far away from us. Looking at their faces, they were the 3 celestial masters from Mount Longhu that had chased us before. I had been in the corpse sect for several months, but I didn't think that they would be so patient and wait until now. Not long after we stopped, the 3 people landed in front of us. The one in front was still the fat celestial master. He stared at me with a smile on his face and said, "I traveled far and wide to find you. Yesterday there seemed to be an accident in the corpse sect, so I didn't have time to check it out. I didn't expect to meet you here. Zhou-Yi, this time you have nowhere to run, right?" He couldn't suppress the smile on his face, and his fat face almost deformed. However, he definitely didn't know that I couldn't suppress the joy in my heart at this time. I thought that the evil sacrificial spirit was in a hurry to go into seclusion and wouldn't be able to find the people from Mount Longhu to take revenge. However, I didn't think that they would come to me first. Chapter 447. I coldly looked at the fat great heavenly master and smiled. Since you people from Mount Longhu are so patient, I naturally have nowhere to run. May I know your name? The fat great heavenly master wasn't in a hurry to make a move. He nodded. Fine, I'll let you know. This humble Taoist is Li Longqian, the head of the Eastern Hidden Courtyard of Celestial Master Si Han's mansion. Eastern Hidden Courtyard? It was said that it was the only Tao Academy in the Celestial Master's abode. The dean's identity was extraordinary, and he held an extremely important position in the Celestial Master's abode. It was no wonder that the fat Celestial Master was the superior of the other 2 Celestial Masters. As for the name Li Longqian, according to the blood drop generation of the 3 mountains of Jingyi School, he was obviously 1 generation older than Chen Yangting. I nodded. So it's Li Longqian, the head of the Eastern Hidden Courtyard. No wonder you're so powerful. However, there's something I don't understand. I've already told you everything about what happened in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty. Why are you still chasing after me these past few months? This was indeed what puzzled me. There was enmity between me and Mount Longhu, but to them, that woman was more important. Even if they didn't believe me, they should have made preparations in many ways. However, the 3 of them were the ones who chased after me, and the 3 of them were still guarding me. It seemed that they hadn't left this place in the past few months and had placed all their chips on me. When Li Longqian heard what I said, He shook his head and sneered. My Mount Longhu has its reasons. How can a little thief like you interfere? You only need to know that if my Mount Longhu wants you dead, you must die. What a tyrannical Mount Longhu! When I first met Chen Yangting, the head of the profound altar palace, I had already seen how tyrannical Mount Longhu was. Today, Li Longqian had given me a new understanding. Chen Yangting had only slandered me for secretly learning the technique, but he wanted to take my life without a reason. The anger in my heart surged, but I couldn't help but feel suspicious. From his words, it seemed that he wanted to kill me here and now. Could it be that Mount Longhu no longer wanted to find that woman? Before I could ask further, Li Longqian said, As for the matter regarding the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty, after you die, we will search your soul. We will find the answer. It is more reliable than your empty words. I suddenly understood. No wonder he wanted to kill me. He wanted to search my soul. No matter what kind of secret technique it was, after the soul search, the soul would definitely be destroyed. What a heavenly master of Longhu Mountain! Not only did he want to take someone's life, he didn't even let go of their soul. I was so angry that I laughed. I mocked, You're so arrogant. If you want me dead, I'll die. Is it possible that the Celestial Master Mansion of Mount Longhu doesn't worship Celestial Master Zhang, but the Tenyama Kings? I'm afraid that even if Zhang Daoling were to reincarnate, he wouldn't be as arrogant as you. After hearing my words, the three heavenly masters of Longhu Mountain seemed to be even angrier than me, especially Li Longqian. His expression changed as he said, Bastard, how dare you say Celestial Master Zhang's name? Originally, I could have left you with an intact corpse, but you dared to disrespect the ancestor Celestial Master. Today, I will pull out your tongue and skin you. I will let you have a taste of the hell of having your tongue pulled out. There was nothing more to say. I took a step forward and was about to attack. After completing the 8th step of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper, I had the ability to fight against the Celestial Master. This time, after absorbing the shaman energy of the Tai Sui giant corpse, my power had skyrocketed. Even if I were to face the old Celestial Master of Longhu Mountain, I wouldn't be afraid. I was confident that I wouldn't be inferior to him. However, at this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit extended his hand and pulled me back. He shook his head and said, I can't support the great power I absorbed for too long. Don't waste time. I'll take care of these three. After saying that, he walked toward the three people from Longhu Mountain. Of course, I didn't have any objections to what he said. Originally, I wanted to test my current power. The best-case scenario was that I would be on par with Li Longqian. If I wanted to deal with them, I would have to rely on the evil spirit. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't conceal his words, so Li Longqian obviously heard him. He sneered disdainfully and ignored the evil sacrificial spirit. He looked at me and said, You're so confident today because you're relying on this flying zombie, right? Haha, you're really naive, kid. Although this kind of zombie otherworldly item can also become a heavenly master, it's far inferior to an ordinary heavenly master. How can it be a match for me, heavenly master Jingyi? Fine, I'll let you witness the supreme techniques of my Dragon Tiger Mountain today. With that, he was too lazy to make a move. With a wave of his Taoist robe, he signaled a skinny, dark-skinned heavenly master standing on his left to fight. The skinny, dark-skinned heavenly master obeyed the order and walked to the front of the evil sacrificial spirit. Just as he was about to cup his hands and say something, the evil sacrificial spirit seemed to have lost its patience. It opened its mouth slightly and its voice was like a clap of thunder. After a mysterious syllable was uttered, the evil sacrificial spirit raised a finger and drew a horizontal line in front of its chest. In the next second, I was frightened to see blood spurt out of the skinny heavenly master's chest. Then, it was as if an invisible blade had slashed across his chest. The skinny heavenly master was cut into two halves. He didn't even need to use half a move before he died. In just a blink of an eye, Li Longqian's face was filled with shock. His smile disappeared. I stood next to him, but I wasn't surprised at all. I had seen the evil sacrificial spirit's mysterious technique in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty. At that time, he had uttered 2 syllables in a row to repel the joint attack of more than 10 heavenly masters. Now, he had used the same technique again. Although he had only uttered 1 syllable, his opponent was just an ordinary heavenly master. It was a normal result. The deathly silent atmosphere lasted for half a minute before Li Longqian retracted his gaze from the remains of the skinny heavenly master and turned to look at the evil sacrificial spirit. There was no longer any disdain in his eyes. Instead, there was an intense fear. At the same time, the evil sacrificial spirit's gaze shifted to him. It didn't waste any time and used the same technique, uttering the mysterious syllable again. She. With the skinny heavenly master as an example, Li Longqian didn't dare to be careless. He quickly took out several silver talismans. With a light rub of his fingers, all the talismans were activated. They formed several layers of colorless glass-like barriers in the air in front of him. As expected of the master of the eastern hidden courtyard, his reaction was extremely fast. After he had done all that, the evil sacrificial spirit's finger had just raised and slashed down diagonally in the air. Just like before, another celestial master standing behind Li Longqian suffered an unexpected calamity, as if an invisible giant blade had slashed past him. From the right side of his neck to the left side of his chest, he was sliced into 2 halves and instantly breathed his last. The layers of defensive talismans in front of Li Longqian didn't have any effect. They were shattered almost instantly, and his whole body was cut in half at the waist. Unlike the other 2, after Li Longqian was cut in half at the waist, his organs flowed all over the ground, but he didn't die immediately. He even crawled a few steps on the ground with his hand. His huge eyes stared at the evil sacrificial spirit and his mouth moved, but he couldn't make any sound. After a while, his arms went limp and he finally died. The result was not beyond my expectations, but the process was a little different from what I had imagined. I hadn't fought with Li Longqian, but I could vaguely see that even if his cultivation base hadn't reached the Yang God realm, it wasn't far from it. Who would have thought that when facing the evil sacrificial spirit, he wouldn't be able to fight back? It seemed that my previous guess was right. In the same realm, the evil sacrificial spirit was an invincible existence. Since he had the cultivation base of a Yang God Celestial Master, no Yang God Celestial Master was his opponent. If even a Yang God Celestial Master wasn't his opponent, I was afraid that in this world, only the old president or the current heavenly master of Mount Longhu would have the ability to fight against him. As I was thinking about this, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't move at all. It was as if he had casually crushed 2 ants. He lifted his feet and walked around the corpses. Then, he urged me to continue our journey. I didn't say anything and followed him. After a long time, we finally walked out of the 1,000-mile-long Taihang mountain range and arrived at Pingding County, which was located at the western entrance of Taihang Mountain. At this place, the evil sacrificial spirit seemed to be unable to suppress the power in his body and hurriedly separated from me. I asked him where he was going to seclusion and how we would meet after he finished his seclusion. However, he shook his head and didn't answer. Let me move around as I please. Once he finishes digesting the power in his body, he will find me. After saying that, he left towards the west and disappeared into the western sky in an instant. Not long after the evil sacrificial spirit left, Jiang Dongqing also woke up. Although he was seriously injured, he still had the cultivation base of a heavenly master, so he was able to move around without any problems. He hurriedly asked me about what had happened after he had fainted. I didn't hide anything and told him about the deaths of Suingxiu and Li Longqian. Jiang Dongqing was silent for a long time. Then, He turned his head and kowtowed 3 times in the direction of the corpse insect. Then, he stood up and carried eldest senior brother's body on his back. He picked up the heavenly fan and said goodbye to me. Before he left, he told me to go see Grandfather Lee when I had time. I didn't know if I should go see the old president, so I didn't give him a formal answer. I just told him that I would try my best to go when I had time. Jiang Dongqing didn't say anything more. After cupping his hands to thank me, he left. After they all left, I was the only one left. I silently stayed in place and began to think. After this matter, where should I go? I haven't avenged my parents, I haven't resolved the enmity of being hunted down by Mount Longhu, and I haven't been cleared of the crime of killing 18 heavenly masters. However, these things require absolute power. Before meeting the evil sacrificial spirit again, it's useless to think too much. The safety of the fatty was still uncertain. I had promised to find Yi Pianpian to investigate the situation, but I hadn't done it yet. Also, I didn't know how the reconstruction of the Feng Shui metaphysics shop in Guangzhou was going. I also didn't know how Wang Kuan's son, little Wang Li, was doing. These were all things I needed to do. However, I was forced to stay in the corpse insect for several months. At this time, little Wang Li was already half a year old, and the fatty's crisis had also passed. I still needed to investigate the situation with Yi Pianpian, so the matter with the Feng Shui metaphysics shop wasn't important. There were so many things in my mind, but they didn't seem to be important at the moment. However, there was only one thing in my mind. Nearly half a year had passed since I left the corpse insect. I didn't know how Bai An was doing. Chapter 448. On the way to Shenangjia, I couldn't help but think about the conversation between the evil sacrificial spirit and the Tai Sui in the Yin Corpse sect. What is the power of the origin? What is the mountain and sea realm? I had asked the evil sacrificial spirit these questions on the way, but the answer he gave me was that it wasn't the right time yet. This feeling made me very uncomfortable. Just like Nangong and the old president, it seemed that everyone around me knew what was going on, except for me. With these complicated thoughts, I didn't talk much on the way. Soon, the car arrived in Hubei. I took another car and went to the Shenangjia scenic area alone. After leaving for half a year and arriving here, I put those annoying things to one side, and my heart was full of happiness. It was probably because of the dangerous journey that I had been running for my life. I was eager to find someone close to me to talk to. That person was probably the closest person to me in this world. Over the years, I didn't have many people close to me. Tong Tong was the first. I had always treated her as my younger sister. The spirit snake was half a friend to me. As for the fatty, he was my friend and also my brother who had grown up together with me. Although the mystery from last time still hadn't been solved, I believed from the bottom of my heart that he wouldn't lie to me. Apart from them, there was only Bai An. She was my wife. Although we hadn't seen each other much and hadn't spoken much, she was still the closest person in my heart. Whenever I was happy, she was the one I wanted to share with the most. Whenever I was in trouble, she was the one I wanted to talk to the most. My previous emotional experience was blank, but I knew very well in my heart that this was love. Sometimes I felt that I wasn't a good husband. Bai An and I didn't spend much time together. Every time we met, we only stayed for 1 or 2 days. Then, because of various things, we had to leave in a hurry. Fortunately, she was considerate and never complained about anything. But because of this, I felt that I had wronged her. Many times, I had the thought that I wanted to stay with her for a long time. I didn't care about the Heavenly Master, Shaman Qi, or Emperor Ku of the Gao Xian clan. I wanted to throw everything away and stay here with Bai An forever. But every time I thought about this, there was always an obstacle in my heart that I couldn't get rid of. It was the Liu family. I have to avenge my parents' blood feud. Most of the times I left, it was for this reason. But now, the situation seems to be different. In the past, I couldn't see any hope of revenge, so I kept working hard and cultivating until the day I had the strength to overthrow the Lu clan. This time, I already had one foot in the Celestial Master realm. I was confident that I could fight anyone in the Lu family. With my eyes and the snake spirit, although I couldn't guarantee that I could wipe out the Lu family, I could at least fight them head-on. Moreover, there was the sacrificial evil spirit. As long as he digested the power, he could crush the entire Lu family with a single finger. Now that I had confidence in my heart, my obsession from before had faded a little. This didn't mean that I didn't want to take revenge, but I was no longer in such a rush. I no longer thought about it day and night. All he had to do was wait for the sacrificial evil spirit to come back and settle everything. At this moment, I wasn't in a rush for revenge, nor was I in a rush for anything else. So, I had to accompany Tao Wu for a few more days. When I reached my destination, it was already dusk. The sky was getting dark. Perhaps it was because I was close to home, but I felt nervous. I stood by the riverside and took a few deep breaths before I calmed down. Just then, a fluorescent light appeared before my eyes. The majestic hall came into view again. Looking at the familiar words Fire God Temple on the board, I eagerly stepped onto the red stone steps and stepped into the hall. The red platform, the red seat, everything was the same as before. This time, Yin Tong didn't appear. I looked around and there was no one in the hall. I vaguely remembered that the last time I came here, Yin Tong told me that he was the ancestor of the Shang dynasty, Shang-Chi. Then, he disappeared. However, Tao Wu told me that she had never felt his presence. Just as I was thinking about this, the voice that I had been waiting for a long time entered my ears. The voice was like the sound of nature, making me feel warm. However, I couldn't help but feel nervous and guilty. Of course, I was mostly happy. "Husband, you're here." The one who had spoken was Tao Wu. She was still smiling sweetly and considerate, without a trace of sadness or worry. I turned to look. Tao Wu was still wearing her red wedding dress. She was smiling and her eyes were filled with surprise. "Husband, you'll be back in less than half a year. How was it? Did everything go smoothly outside?" I pretended to be calm. At this moment, the Heavenly Master and the Battle of the Witchcraft were nothing compared to the smile of my lovely wife. It went smoothly. Everything went smoothly. As I said that, I couldn't help but extend my hand to touch Tao Wu's delicate face. Tao Wu was a little bashful. She lowered her chin slightly and the light from the fire shone on her face, making her look even more charming. "Did you miss your husband?" With the light from the fire, I could see the fine hair on Tao Wu's face and ears, adding to her charm. "Yes." Tao Wu's chin drooped again. Looking at the fairy-like beauty in front of me, I couldn't help but recall what she'd said when I'd left the Fire God Temple and she'd taken the initiative to let me lift her veil. Although we've never done the deed of husband and wife, our hearts are connected. "Husband, can you lift my veil today?" Even now, my heart couldn't help but flutter when I recalled what she'd said. Her bashful look was even more alluring. I couldn't help but want to dote on her. Caressing her cheeks, I couldn't help but say emotionally, "Husband missed you too." Then, I pressed my lips against hers. Before I'd come, I'd wanted to say a million things to Tao Wu. However, when I saw Tao Wu, all my words disappeared. Perhaps, giving my lover a deep kiss was the best thing to say. Tao Wu probably hadn't expected such an intimate action from me. She lowered her chin even more and her snow-white neck was tinged with pink. Although we'd been husband and wife for a long time and I didn't reject the deed of husband and wife, I didn't rush to do anything after the kiss. I just looked at her with a burning gaze. Tao Wu was still as shy as a frightened deer. She slightly avoided my hot gaze. After a while, she raised her head to look at me again. Her gaze carried a bit of heartache. "Did husband suffer any grievances outside these past few months? You look much more haggard." Although I didn't directly participate in the battle at the corpse sect, I was also affected. My clothes were inevitably torn and I looked haggard. I quickly shook my head. No, my time outside has been smooth. Let's not talk about that. This time, I plan to stay here for a long time. We'll stay together in this temple. Hearing my words, Tao Wu was slightly stunned. After a while, she muttered, "Staying together for a long time is naturally good, but, what? You don't want to? How could that be possible? Of course I'm willing. Every day I hope to be with husband for 100 years. Staying in this cave every day, I'm always worried that husband will forget Tao Wu." Tao Wu smiled. There was a hint of melancholy in her voice. My heart slightly ached. This little fool, staying alone in this desolate cave every day. It was really hard on her. Thinking of this, I felt even more tender towards her. I couldn't help but scratch Tao Wu's nose and said, "Fool, you're my wife. Which husband in this world would forget his own wife? In the past few years, I've always been worried about other things, so I neglected you. Now I understand. Although there are other things, it's more important to cherish the people in front of me. You're my wife. I won't let you stay alone in this desolate cave anymore. You can't go out, so I came here to accompany you. Unless it's something necessary, I won't go out. From now on, this will be my home." I wasn't stupid. I could clearly feel that many people had ulterior motives for getting close to me. Only Tao Wu. She wholeheartedly wanted to be good to me. She never thought of asking anything from me. How could I bear to abandon her and go out to pursue those groundless matters? Moreover, after going out for 1,000 miles, although it was a blessing in disguise, my heart was still extremely tired. At this moment I said these words. On one hand, I felt very guilty towards the woman who was closest to me. On the other hand, I was tired of the mutual deception outside. Rather than racking my brains to survive outside, it was better to return here and live in seclusion. In the eyes of ordinary people, it was only natural for a woman to rely on their husband. However, Tao Wu was overwhelmed by the favor. Her eyes were even slightly misty. Currently, my realm was already close to that of a heavenly master. Adding on the fact that I had cultivated the 8th step of clear insight, my eyesight had become even more powerful. Furthermore, Swan Ni's cultivation seemed to have increased as well. In my eyes, he seemed to be even more solid and real. Previously, I might have had a knot in my heart and always felt that Tao Wu was a ghost bride. However, now that I had experienced so many things, I knew that she was the most important to me. Regardless of whether she was a human or a ghost, it wouldn't change that. Tao Wu was obviously moved. After a brief silence, she grabbed my hand and clasped her fingers tightly. She said, "With husband's words, Tao Wu will have no regrets even if I die." I smiled and pulled Tao Wu into my embrace. Smelling the faint fragrance on her body, I pretended to be angry. "Fool, why are you talking about life and death? We still have a long time in the future." Tao Wu smiled faintly and allowed me to hold her in my embrace. However, she avoided the previous topic and asked, "I can see that husband's cultivation seems to be about to break through to Celestial Master?" "Celestial Master?" I smiled wryly in my heart. Wouldn't I become the dowry of that old witch in Miaojiang? I only reported the good news and didn't report the bad news. It's just a short distance away. The Qilin Gu was one of the 2 ancestral Gu in Miaojiang. It had the power of the Juli god. I believed that Tao Wu, who was only at the Yin god realm, wouldn't be able to break the Qilin Gu. Moreover, the sacrificial evil spirit would find a way sooner or later. There was no need for me to say it now and make her worry for no reason. Tao Wu smiled and buried her head in my chest. She seemed to be deep in thought. I thought she had noticed something and was about to explain. However, Tao Wu suddenly said with a voice as soft as a mosquito's buzz, "Husband, it's still late. Why don't we go to bed early?" I lowered my head and saw that Tao Wu, who had a shy face, now had a pink tint to her ears. I had slept on the same bed with Tao Wu before. However, it was obvious that she didn't just mean it on the surface when she said, to go to bed. Even though I was a beginner, I still understood what was going on. Husband and wife intercourse was part of the human relationship. I was already prepared for it, so I didn't say anything. I bent down and picked her up, returning to her cave residence. Tao Wu's body wasn't any different from an ordinary person's. The next morning, Tao Wu and I both woke up. Currently, my cultivation was close to that of a celestial master. On the path of cultivation, not only did I improve my strength, but I also became more tenacious. There was still a long time in the future. I naturally wouldn't be greedy for a moment of pleasure. After getting up, Tao Wu and I were more indifferent than yesterday. There seemed to be endless words of love between us. We sat there and talked about our experiences after we parted. Unknowingly, another day had passed. Beautiful time always seemed so short. With Tao Wu by my side, staying here for a lifetime would only be a flash. I hugged Tao Wu quietly. I didn't want to let go for even a moment. Chapter 449. Lao AI. I couldn't react in time, so I called out in a daze. When he realized what had happened, he panicked and tried to hug her with all his might. However, he realized that his hands had directly passed through her body. Lao AI had turned into an illusion. Lao AI. Lao AI. This time, my voice was heart-wrenching. I didn't know what had happened and I didn't dare to believe what was happening in front of me. At that moment, Lao AI's body had turned illusory. Her face was sad and she reached out her hands like she wanted to grab me, but her body seemed to be pulled from behind and she couldn't help but retreat. I sat up like I was electrocuted and chased after her with all my might. I wanted to grab her but she kept retreating and was always just a little faster than me. Lao AI, don't go. I was just one step away from Sky Master. Although I couldn't fly, my speed was still shocking. Even so, I couldn't catch up to her. Lao AI's face was filled with sadness and her expression was even more pained than mine. She opened her mouth and it was obvious that she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Even her illusory body was fading. What was going on? I definitely wasn't dreaming. My cheeks were hurting because I was moving so fast. However, I couldn't do anything about it. I could only watch as my wife's silhouette moved further and further away, becoming blurry and indistinct. I couldn't help but roar in rage. All the meridians in my body were activated and the Shaman Chi Source Stone and Tao Energy Source Stone in my body provided me with energy. I was a dual cultivator and my strength was no weaker than some Sky Masters. However, it was useless. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch up to her. I grabbed the jade bracelet and crazily absorbed the power of the true dragon vein and the shaman energy that I had gotten from swallowing the Tai Sui. However, I could never catch up to Lao AI. I could only see the bone-deep helplessness on Lao AI's face. My mind was blank, but I gritted my teeth and used all the power in my body. I had to save Lao AI, I had to save my wife. If a man couldn't even protect the woman he loved, what else could he do? I definitely didn't believe that Lao AI would leave me. The sadness on her face was even thicker than mine. Someone had definitely taken her hostage. No matter who it is, as long as they hurt Lao AI, I will never let them off. Silently activating the power in my body, I clenched my teeth and took the 8th step of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper. Apart from being used in battle, the astral steps was also useful in chasing an enemy. The moment I used the astral steps, my body's functions would be amplified several times. I gathered all of my cultivation under my feet and fiercely stomped on the ground. In a split second, my body shot forward like lightning. At this moment, the Tao Chi and Shaman Chi in my body had both reached glorious knowledge great completion, and I was just a thin layer away from Heaven Master. Along with the support of 9-star Heavenly Dipper, when I stepped out, my body was like lightning, and my speed increased by more than a level. Not to mention a normal Heaven Master, even a young God Heaven Master could only do so. But even so, Tao Wu was still slightly faster than me. I rushed out of the cave in vain. In front of me was still that sorrowful face and the figure that was fading away. The 8th step of 9-star Heavenly Dipper was called Bright Insight. After mastering it, not only would one's power increase, it would also allow one to see through everything. One's eyesight would also improve greatly, and even a sesame seed that was 100 meters away wouldn't be able to escape my vision. But even so, Tao Wu's figure was still fading, so faint that I couldn't recognize it. I trembled as I took a deep breath, and furiously activated the energy in my body. The 7 Tao Chi Source Stones and Shaman Chi Source Stone continuously released energy, and the dragon power of the true dragon vein in the jade bracelet was also transferred. I took another step, and my body exploded once more. The more powerful the technique, the more energy it consumed. Continuously using the astral steps had already exhausted my Tao Chi and Shaman Chi, but the final result was still the same. It seemed that Tao Wu and I didn't move, and she still maintained the same distance from me. If I carefully measured this short distance, it was probably less than 10 feet, but this distance was like a moat. I was completely panicking. I couldn't lose Tao Wu. Panting heavily, I gathered my energy again, clenched my teeth, and stared at Tao Wu's painful and blurry expression. I tried my best to activate all the shaman and Tao Chi in my body. I forced myself to take the 9th step. I had already memorized the incantation of the 9-star astral dipper. But because my realm wasn't high enough, I could only touch the doorstep of the 9th step. I didn't dare to take it, because if I forced myself to take it, I would only hurt myself, and the loss would outweigh the gain. But at this moment I didn't care so much, and I didn't care if he would hurt himself, or if the loss would outweigh the gain. I only knew that I needed to be faster, and I needed to take this step to catch up to my Tao Wu. According to the death scripture, the power of the 9th step of the astral dipper was equivalent to the total power of the previous 8 steps of the astral dipper. The 8th step, profound insight, already had the power of a heavenly master, so the power of the 9th step could be imagined. Even if I had to face it head-on, I was confident that I could easily deal with those ordinary heavenly masters. After taking this step, my speed reached a terrifying level. With a heavy stomp, even the hard ground of the fire god temple was cracked. After my body shot out, the friction between my feet and the air seemed to be rubbing against each other, and golden light shone in all directions. The golden light was like a pillar of light that spread in all directions, and even illuminated the deep and quiet fire god temple. My speed almost broke through the sound barrier, and it was comparable to flying on a sword. But Tao Wu was still less than 10 feet in front of me, and the distance didn't change. I could still see 2 lines of tears and an even more blurry figure. The huge consumption caused beads of sweat to drip down my forehead. Tao Wu looked as if her heart ached, and she desperately wanted to say something, but no matter how she opened her mouth, no sound came out. Perhaps emotions could make people explode, but they couldn't really give people power. Under the continuous consumption, even though I was unwilling, even though I was on the verge of going crazy, in the end, as my strength was exhausted, my speed gradually slowed down. I thought that when I was fast, Tao Wu would be faster, and when I was slow, she would naturally be slower. I didn't expect that Tao Wu's figure didn't slow down, but became even faster. Tao Wu's figure floated towards the main hall, and became more and more illusory, until it finally disappeared into the endless darkness. Tao Wu. I let out another mournful scream. Vaguely, I seemed to hear Lao Ai saying, "Take care of yourself, husband." I panted heavily, and didn't care about the exhaustion on my body. I crazily searched the main hall, but I couldn't even feel a trace of Tao Wu's aura. Where did she go? I didn't give up, and looked around again, but I still couldn't find anything. Endless fear surged in my heart. What people were most afraid of wasn't strong power or cruel killing, but the unknown. Even now I was still at a loss. Why did Tao Wu disappear? What kind of power was controlling everything? After searching every corner of the main hall, I slumped on the ground. Thinking back to the situation just now, I felt more and more helpless. Even if I were to face the sacrificial evil spirit, I would only feel that he was very powerful, and wouldn't feel as helpless as when Tao Wu was always one zhang away from me. It was as if it was the will of heaven and earth that didn't allow me to resist. Father. Suddenly, a dignified voice sounded from behind me. I didn't know when, but the silver-eyed person had suddenly appeared behind me. A bit of hope surged in my heart, and I hurriedly got up from the ground. I asked him anxiously, "Where's Tao Wu? Did you see my wife?" The silver-eyed person bowed. "Father, there's no need to look for her. It's easy to see her. You just have to come back to Fire God Temple half a year later." Half a year. I suddenly let out a breath of relief, not because it wasn't a long time, but because the silver-eyed person's words proved that he knew what had happened. However, anger surged in my heart. I just had the thought of staying with Tao Wu for a long time, so why did someone have to play tricks on me? I clenched my teeth and continued to ask coldly, "Who took my wife?" "It's not a person." The silver-eyed person's attitude became even more respectful. He bowed and said, "Father, the one who took her was heaven, heaven's will." Heaven's will? I was stunned and couldn't react in time. The silver-eyed person continued, "Father is currently dual cultivating in witchcraft, and you're only one step away from becoming a heaven master. Heaven's will has restrictions. Witchcraft or a heaven master requires the power of Tai Sui, which is the same source and body. On the other hand, Taoist aura requires the power of the stars, and draws the power of the stars to the source. Now that Father is already a heaven master, and your witchcraft aura has broken through the sky barrier, it's already going against heaven's will. How can heaven allow you to get together with the Yin God?" I seem to have heard Nangong mention that witchcraft or a heaven master needed to establish a connection with Tai Sui. Nangong had done it back then, and it was exactly the same as what the silver-eyed person said. However, there weren't any living Tai Sui in the current world, so how could my witchcraft aura reach the heaven master level? After absorbing the enormous witchcraft aura from corpse sex Tai Sui, my realm could have broken through to the heaven master level. I could even faintly see my body breaking through the barrier, but there was no movement. I was originally worried that I would turn into the Kirin Gu after breaking through to the Heaven Master level, but from what the silver-eyed person said, it seemed to be going against Heaven's will. Could it be that I had no hope of breaking through in this lifetime? But if that was the case, the sacrificial evil spirit still said that I had to break through the barrier by myself? The Heaven's will didn't want me to reach the Heaven Master level, so it set up layers and layers of barriers for me. Now, it wanted to take Tao Wu away from me? I couldn't help but feel sad. If that's the case, then tell me, what is this Heaven's will? What does it want? I clenched my teeth and said fiercely. My heart was firm to the extreme. No one could separate me and Tao Wu. I thought of when I was still a child. She would quietly watch me from my bedside and help me rub my legs. I thought of how she would quietly wait for me in the tomb of the living dead every day. I thought of all the things that had happened between us. Was it possible that I would have to say goodbye to her forever? Just because of this damned Heaven's will? Father, don't be too agitated. It's not like you can't meet that woman. Oh? What method do you have? Tell me quickly. The method is simple. From now on, you and that woman can meet once every half a year for 1 day each time. This is the rule of the Heaven's will. Originally, breaking through the barrier is already going against the Heaven's will. However, everything in the world has a natural counter. Even if the Heaven's will is the judge, it won't be so heartless. From this, you will still have a chance to meet that Yin spirit woman unless... Unless what? Unless you can ascend to become an immortal, then you can change the heaven's will. Ascend to become an immortal. Change the heaven's will. Both the Taoist and Xian sects had the saying of ascending to become an immortal. I naturally understood what it meant. What shocked me was the phrase, change the heaven's will. I vaguely recalled the change the heaven that the evil spirit and Tai Sui had mentioned. Could it be that they were talking about changing the heaven's will? But what was the heaven's will? I had always thought that the heaven's will was just a concept, a rule of heaven and earth. However, from the words of the silver-eyed man, even from the evil spirit and Tai Sui, the heaven's will seemed to be a person. I was silent for a while before I asked the silver-eyed man, "What is the heaven's will? Is it a person?" The silver-eyed man became silent too. After a while, he grinned. "The heaven's will is the heaven's will. It's not wrong to call it a person. However, a person who can control the will of heaven and earth can't be called a person. Perhaps the word God is more suitable to describe him." God! I was shocked again. Even with my current cultivation as a celestial master, in the eyes of a normal person, I could already be called a god. I even knew how strong cultivators with higher realms were. However, in the eyes of a normal person, those powerful and magical techniques might be the methods of a celestial. However, in the eyes of a cultivator, it was just a stronger power. Why did the silver-eyed man use the word God? Was there really a God in this world? If there was it a cultivator with extremely high cultivation, or was it another existence that had surpassed human life? I didn't understand, so I opened my mouth to ask again. The silver-eyed man seemed to know what I was thinking. Without waiting for me to speak, he shook his head and said, "Father, the gods are indescribable. Even I don't know what the heaven's will is. You only need to know that the existence that stands at the top of the world is the heaven's will. He overlooks all living beings and sets all rules. If people want to break free from the rules, they must first see him. The prerequisite for seeing him is to surpass human life and ascend to the heavens." Ascend to become a celestial? I laughed bitterly in my heart. Breaking through to become a celestial master was close at hand, yet far beyond my reach. How could it be easy to ascend to become a celestial? It wasn't just me. Wasn't the ultimate goal of all cultivators in the human world to ascend to the heavens? However, from ancient times until now, other than the unofficial history that was passed down through rumors, how many people had actually ascended to the heavens? Moreover, this was only the prerequisite for seeing the heaven's will. I clenched my teeth. Is there no other way? There isn't. Everything in the world has its own rules. This is the heaven's will, the silver-eyed man said slowly. Originally, I had wanted to stay with Tao Wu for a long time. However, halfway through, the heaven's will appeared. I looked up helplessly. There was naturally no sky in the hall, only a dome. I didn't know if the vast sky that I usually looked up at was the same concept as the so-called heaven's will. I could only see that the mural on the dome seemed to be mocking me. A man couldn't even protect his own woman. He could only watch helplessly as she was taken away helplessly, yet he couldn't do anything about it. Back then, when I saw my parents die in front of me, I was filled with despair and self-blame. I felt that I was the most useless good-for-nothing. Only now, when I saw the light of revenge, did I break free from the deep self-blame. However, I didn't expect that this would happen immediately. Back then, I was only facing the Liu family. I wanted to take revenge, and I knew that I had a target. But now, what was in front of me was an empty heaven's will. The current me was even more lost than before. However, at the same time, I was even more determined than before. Just like what the silver-eyed man had said, what was in front of me was the heaven's will. I could only change the heaven's will. Even though I didn't know what the heaven's will was, it didn't affect my determination. One day, I would change the heaven's will, not for anything else, but to be able to stay with my wife for a long time. As for what to do, I would naturally get an answer when the evil spirit comes back from the sacrificial ceremony. As I walked out of the fire god temple, I turned back to look and muttered in my heart, "Tao Wu, see you in half a year." Then, I raised my head to look at the sky that was filled with stars. Chapter 450. The flame god temple behind me slowly became illusory, turning into an illusory shadow until it completely disappeared. I looked at the scene in front of me in a daze, unable to speak for a long time. As I sat there dejectedly, I felt a stabbing pain in my heart. It was as if a knife was twisting and turning in my heart. The person I loved was forcibly taken away from me by someone else, and I couldn't do anything about it. This feeling was really unbearable. As I recalled all the good things about Bai-en, the heartache became even more intense. It was simply unbearable. There were some things that one would only know how to cherish after losing them. Previously, when we were together, I would always enjoy the joy that Bai-en brought me. Slowly, I felt that it was only natural. However, when everything was taken away by someone else, you would know how selfish you were. Bai-en had always been helping me silently. I didn't even have the time to do anything for her. Even if it was an insignificant matter, the heavens had taken her away from me. Sadness, guilt, self-blame, all the emotions flashed through my mind like a movie, making me feel even more uncomfortable. I sat there powerlessly as I stared at the spot where the fire god temple had originally appeared in a daze. Suddenly, a screen of light appeared on the originally empty ground. The majestic hall appeared in front of me once again. My heart tightened. Could it be that there was a change in the situation? Could it be that the heavens had suddenly changed their mind due to some pressure? This thought was a little absurd, but I couldn't help but think in the best possible way. I took quick steps and entered the flame god temple again. "Father, don't be overly sad. That woman was willing to sacrifice 1,000 years of her lifespan. Naturally, she didn't want to see Father like this." I searched the hall for a long time, but I couldn't find Bai-en. I could only hear the voice of the silver-eyed person. That voice was like a huge bell, rousing one's spirit. The dejection that I felt earlier seemed to have floated away along with the loud voice. My spirit was lifted once again. I calmed myself down. What did the silver-eyed person mean? Why did he say that Bai-en had to sacrifice 1,000 years of her lifespan? I couldn't help but ask, why did Bai-en have to sacrifice her lifespan? The cultivation path of ghosts was similar to that of humans, but they both had lifespan. The people from the Taoist Association had used the Jade Blood Talisman, Tao technique many times to increase their attacks and defenses. The price they had to pay was 10 years of lifespan. Of course, it didn't mean that using this Tao technique would reduce your lifespan by 10 years, but it meant that your cultivation base would be delayed by 10 years. For example, you could become a young god celestial master at 60, but after using this Tao technique, you could only wait until you were 70 to become a young god celestial master. Think about it, those who could become celestial masters were mostly old people. How many years could they have? Moreover, humans were intelligent beings born from 3 souls, and if ghosts sacrificed their lifespan, it would be even more harmful to their cultivation, and cultivation would be even more difficult. If you were of you would have think, and you celesti, you and you and you. If she sacrificed another 1,000 years of her lifespan, wouldn't that mean that she would never be able to advance her cultivation base? Back in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty, the Taoists of Mount Longhu and the Taoist Association didn't hesitate to risk their lives to obtain the key to the immortal gate. From this, one could see how important lifespan was to cultivators. And Bai, in order to see me, had risked her entire life's worth of cultivation? Thinking about this, I felt a trace of warmth in my heart. However, it was soon replaced by endless remorse and self-blame. Humans are greedy. I was proud that I had a woman who was willing to sacrifice everything for me, but I couldn't help but blame myself for my incompetence. How could I, a cultivator who hadn't even become a celestial master, resist the heavenly Tao? Imperial Father, that woman was willing to sacrifice her entire lifetime of cultivation just to be able to see Imperial Father. How can Imperial Father give up on yourself? The silver-eyed man slowly tried to explain. Father's dual cultivation of witchcraft has already gone against the heavenly Tao. Moreover, the heavenly Tao has its rules. A celestial master in the human world can't get along with a Een god in the netherworld. That woman went to the heavenly Tao to reason with it. She swore on her Taoist heart and was willing to sacrifice her entire life's worth of cultivation in exchange for being able to see you, Father. If you were to be in such dire straits, I'm afraid that woman would be heartbroken if she knew. Father, you should pull yourself together. You are the most honorable person in the world. How could you give up on yourself because of such a small setback? The silver-eyed man wasn't trying to persuade me anymore, but rather, it was more like a warning. His words were like sharp needles stabbing into my chest. My body shuddered. I had never thought that there would be such an inside story. Imagine, a weak woman like Bai, going to reason with the heavenly Tao alone for her husband. She sacrificed her entire life's worth of cultivation in exchange for being able to see her husband once every 6 months. How much courage did she have? If Bai could do that, how could I, a man of 7 feet, be at a disadvantage? You're right. I have to pull myself together. I stood up again, sweeping away the dispiritedness I had earlier. In order to be able to meet her, Bai-un was willing to give up her 1,000 years of cultivation. What reason did I have to be disheartened? Where there's a will, there's a way out. Even if I knew that it was a dead end, shouldn't a man give it a try for the woman he loved? I clenched my fists tightly. I'll come back in half a year. I won't let Tao Wu down. One day I'll make the Fire God Temple change. No one can stop me from being with Bai-un. Even if it's the heavens, it won't do. The silver-eyed man smiled knowingly before he bowed and retreated. Very quickly, the blinding fluorescent light gradually disappeared. The Fire God Temple in front of me disappeared again, leaving behind only the wilderness of Shenangjia. This time, I didn't look back and left with determination. For Bai-un, I couldn't stop cultivating. One day, I'll be able to go against the heavenly Tao and make this world change. After straightening out these things, my heart felt much better. Then, I walked out of the scenic area. I had been here many times and was already familiar with the way. After walking for about an hour, I left the Shenangjia scenic area. After my cultivation had advanced, my body had become tougher than before. My speed was also much faster. Previously, it would have taken me 3 hours to walk, but now it only took me 1 hour to complete the journey. When I left the scenic area, it was already evening. It was difficult to get a taxi, so I simply stayed in the hotel next to the scenic area for the night. After a comfortable hot bath, I crawled into bed and lay on the bed, thinking about what to do next. I couldn't do anything about avenging my parents for the time being. After all, the deaths of the 18 heavenly masters were all on my head. If I appeared in the capital at this time, I would become the target of public criticism. At that time, even if I summoned my eyes and the snake spirit, it would be difficult to escape unscathed. It wasn't a big deal for me whether the feng shui metaphysics shop would be rebuilt or not. However, Wang Li should be in the shop right now. Zhang Canwen and I had agreed to meet in 2 years. Now that I thought about it, it had been a year. If we didn't solve this problem soon, it would be too late. Moreover, Zhang Canwen was a member of the Metaphysics Society, so I could ask him to help me inquire about Yi Pianpian. After seeing the so-called human-shaped key in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty, I had a lot of things I wanted to tell Yi Pianpian. I could ask Zhang Canwen to help me inquire about them. At the same time, I could also treat Wang Li's illness. Thinking about this, I made up my mind and fell asleep in a daze. It was a quiet night. The next morning, I got up early and took a bus to the train station to buy a train ticket from Shenangjia to Shenzhen. In fact, it would be faster if I took a plane. However, I wasn't like before. The older I was, the more timid I became. Now I had an instinctive resistance to taking a plane. When I came to Shenangjia with the vice president of the Metaphysics Society, Yang Shilong, he said that if a person embarked on the path of cultivation, the plane was not fated with him. I didn't expect that his words would come true. A Geomaster's energy came from the earth. When they took a plane to the sky, they would lose their energy source, so they would feel uneasy. However, if they could become a heavenly master in one step, their body would become incomparably tough and their speed would not be inferior to that of a plane. Naturally, they wouldn't need to take a plane. Cultivation was like this. Some things had to be slowly comprehended. Back then, when Yang Shilong said those words, he didn't know what it meant. But now that he had experienced so much, he understood many of those principles. It could be said that one was never too old to learn. The train wasn't fast, and there were always stops along the way. After dozens of hours, I finally arrived at Shenzhen. Because I called Wang Kuan earlier, when I got off the train, Wang Kuan was already waiting in the waiting hall. After taking my luggage, Wang Kuan smiled. The train is really punctual now. I just arrived, and I already saw you coming out. Looking at the dozens of cigarette butts at his feet, I didn't want to expose him, so I just smiled. That's a coincidence. How is little Wang Li now? Is his family okay? Good. Wang Kuan probably saw my gaze and scratched his head in embarrassment. His family is fine. Master Zhang said that little Wang Li has already passed his bottleneck. As for the next time, it will depend on his luck. I don't know the specific Tao, so I'm not sure. Anyway, it looks good. Wang Kuan said with a smile. After opening the door and inviting me in, he didn't wait for me to ask and continued. The Feng Shui metaphysics shop has been rebuilt a long time ago. In the beginning, the police would come over every few days to take statements, but these were all routine matters. My family and Master Zhang are now living in the Feng Shui metaphysics shop. However, when I came, my uncle said that Mr. Zhou must be tired from the journey, so he wants to welcome Mr. Zhou to the best hotel in Shenzhen. Originally, I didn't want to go, but I was eager to see little Wang Li's situation. However, since Wang Yongjun invited me, I couldn't reject him, so I just nodded. Okay. Wang Kuan had been with Wang Yongjun for a long time, so he had developed a clever mind. He seemed to have seen through my thoughts, so he added, Master Zhang, Lu Chuanda, Xie Qinghua, and my youngest son will all go. After eating, we can go back to the shop together. I smiled in understanding. Wang Yongjun was worthy of his reputation as an experienced man. He could take care of everything. The two of us quickly arrived at the hotel that Wang Kuan mentioned. Wang Yongjun, Zhang Kanwan, and Xie Qinghua were already there to welcome me. After shaking hands and greeting each of them, I took little Wang Li from Mrs. Wang Kuan's arms and studied him carefully. Chapter 451. Previously, Zhang Kanwan accepted little Wang Li as his disciple and taught him the cultivation method of Mount One. Originally, I thought that after Wang Li passed the half-year barrier, he would be at peace for a while, but it seems that things are worse than I imagined. I lifted little Wang Li's shirt, and the black pit on his chest became more obvious. If the pit was as deep as the sacrificial well in the orchard when I first saw it, then the pit now looked like a sinkhole. At this time, Wang Li was only 1 year old. His body was naturally not very thick, but even so, the pit still looked like an endless deep well. Not to mention cultivators who had opened the yin-yang eye, even ordinary people could see that something was wrong. I glanced to the side. Wang Kuan was dispirited, and he didn't have the smile from before. He had been reporting the good news and not the bad news on the way here. Only then did I notice that Zhang Kanwen's arm was bandaged. I was anxious to see little Wang Li's situation, so I didn't notice it. When Zhang Kanwen had come out of the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum, he had indeed been severely injured. However, it had been so long, and Zhang Kanwen was at the 5-star knowledge realm, so his body was naturally better than ordinary people. It didn't make sense that he hadn't recovered after so long. Could it be that he had been injured by someone again? My expression darkened. Zhang Kanwen was my best friend, and he was the successor of Mount One. If anyone dared to find trouble with Zhang Kanwen, I didn't mind letting them suffer. "Brother Zhang, you're wound?" I asked with a hint of anger in my voice. Zhang Kanwen still had his unshaven appearance, and he waved his hand nonchalantly. "It's okay. It's just a superficial wound. It's not a big deal." Zhang Kanwen didn't seem to want to say it, but Lu Chuanda looked annoyed. "Boss, the person who injured Zhang Kanwen wasn't someone else, but little Wang Li in your arms." My heart quivered, and Wang Kun and the others furrowed their brows even deeper. This was indeed my son's doing. It's the father's fault for not teaching him well. This. Sigh. Wang Kun looked like he was about to cry, and he looked apologetic and terrified. Even the faces of the people around him were filled with fear. Only Zhang Kanwen's expression didn't change, and he smiled leisurely. "Haha. This small injury isn't a problem. I already said that this little fellow has a good physique, good cultivation material. Look, he's still so young, and he's able to beat me, his master. He's worth teaching, haha." While purposely smiling, Zhang Kanwen gave me a look. He was clearly telling me not to continue asking. I nodded and didn't say anything else. However, I was extremely shocked in my heart. Wang Li, who was only 1 year old, was actually able to injure Zhang Kanwen, who had the cultivation of glorious knowledge 5-star. Not only me, but the expression of Wang Kun and Wang Kun's group. Moreover, Zhang Kanwen was unwilling to mention this matter in front of everyone. Clearly, the situation was very serious. Zhang Kanwen, Wang Kanwen, to Wang Li and brother Li Wen. Wang Li said. I Wang Zhang to Wang Zhang Kanwen quickly changed the topic and said to me with a smile, "Don't just talk. Let's go. The meal has already been prepared. You must have experienced many things during this long journey. Tell your big brother about them." As he said that, Zhang Kanwen pulled me to take a seat. Wang Yongjun and the others were used to being arrogant at the dining table, so they naturally knew how to lighten the atmosphere. After a few jokes, everyone finally showed a rare smile and sat down to eat. I had an ulterior motive, so I just casually talked during the meal. The meal was tasteless. Wang Yongjun obviously noticed something was wrong, so he quickly ended the feast and arranged for Wang Kun to send us back. The Feng Shui metaphysics shop was decorated more luxuriously than before. The original 4-story building had a few more floors. It didn't reach the clouds, but it looked quite grand. I couldn't help but admire Wang Yongjun's methods. Previously, the building had collapsed in the downtown area of Shenzhen. I didn't expect that in just a few months, another building had risen from the ground. Zhang Kanwen still looked as calm as before. He got off the car and walked into the shop as though nothing had happened. I couldn't sit still. I didn't have time to observe the situation in the shop. I grabbed his arm and asked, "Brother Zhang, what happened? Did Wang Li really hurt you?" Zhang Kanwen gave me a look and turned to take the child from Wang Kun's wife. He pretended to be indifferent. "Let's go upstairs." I turned to look at Lu Chuanda and Xie Qinghua. The two of them should have seen the scene before. They obviously had some lingering fear. Wang Li and his wife also looked upset as they sighed. I followed Zhang Kanwen to his room with many doubts. "Zhou Yi, I have to congratulate you first. You have reached the glorious consciousness great perfection realm. Looking at your aura, I'm afraid you are only one step away from breaking through to Heavenly Master, right?" After entering the room, Zhang Kanwen still had a faint smile on his face. He wasn't in a hurry to talk about Wang Li's injury. Instead, he asked about my cultivation. Logically speaking, Zhang Kanwen was only at the 5 stars of knowledge realm, and it would be hard for him to see through the realms of those who were much higher than him. However, it was probably because he had the Wen Shan lineage's cultivation technique that he was able to see through my cultivation. Zhang Kanwen was a person who could handle heavy things easily. The more he was like this, the more uneasy I felt. Thus, I just casually replied, I was lucky and had some fortuitous encounters. It could be considered a bargain. Tell me about little Wang Li first. Zhang Kanwen then found a stool to sit down. He looked at Wang Li with a sorrowful expression. The calmness in his eyes gradually turned solemn. At this time, little Wang Li had more or less learned to speak a few words. He was obviously very familiar with Zhang Kanwen and was grinning foolishly at him. What a good child! Zhang Kanwen let out a long sigh. His series of actions made me confused. Even with my temperament, I couldn't stand it anymore. Brother Zhang, what's wrong? Did you encounter some trouble? Tell me so we can solve it together. The more he acted like this, the more uncertain I felt. Zhang Kanwen laughed bitterly. Do you still remember the 2-year promise I made with you? My heart skipped a beat. At that time, Zhang Kanwen concluded that Wang Li had been possessed by Sister Tong Zihua. He had insisted on killing this child. In order to protect him, I gave in and proposed a 2-year agreement. Everyone who cultivated knew how powerful Sister Tong Zihua was. The seemingly deep pit in Wang Li's chest was actually the passage through which the evil creature communicated with the human world. One day, the terrifying existence behind the pit would escape from the passage and bring disaster to the human world. Moreover, most of the evil creatures that possessed Sister Tong Zihua had extraordinary cultivation. If we couldn't get rid of this evil creature by then, we would have no choice but to kill Wang Li. However, we had already calculated a countermeasure at that time. We had successfully passed the first half-year hurdle, and the second hurdle would only come when he was at least 2 years old. What had happened? Little Wang Li had a few small teeth in his pink gums. He smiled brightly and looked harmless, as if he was no different from other children. However, such a powerless baby had injured Zhang Kanwen, a 5-star knowledge star? I said with a solemn expression, Of course, I remember the 2-year agreement you mentioned. But hasn't it only been a year? Zhang Kanwen hugged little Wang Li and kept teasing him, but there wasn't a trace of a smile on his face. At that time, I did predict that the second hurdle would come when he was 2 years old. I also had a certain degree of confidence that I could help him pass that hurdle and deal with the evil creature hiding behind the pit. But now, I'm afraid that with our cultivation, we won't be able to deal with that evil creature after a year. My heart sank. Zhang Kanwen and I had known each other for a long time, so he knew my trump card. Tong, the snake spirit, the corpse demon, and Xiao Jin were all extraordinary creatures with high cultivation. Zhang Kanwen had seen all of them before, and he also knew that I was at the peak of knowledge star and was only 1 step away from becoming a celestial master. In addition to Zhang Kanwen, who had Wen Shan's cultivation technique, even Yang God's celestial master wouldn't be able to take advantage of us. But now, he was so dispirited. What kind of terrifying existence was the monster that had possessed little Wang Li? Little Wang Li was still smiling harmlessly in Zhang Kanwen's arms. His eyes were filled with a child's curiosity towards this strange world and familiarity with Zhang Kanwen. I couldn't imagine that such a powerful evil creature was hiding in this small body. Let's not talk about whether or not we could deal with that evil creature. Once that evil creature broke out of the hole, little Wang Li would immediately turn into ashes. Back then, I had insisted on protecting little Wang Li. Now that things had come to this, how could I just stand by and watch? I was silent for a moment. Then, I extended my hand to take the child from Zhang Kanwen's hands and gently shook him a few times. Little Wang Li wasn't too shy with strangers. After coaxing him a few times, he opened his pink mouth and smiled, just like before. No matter what, I had insisted on saving little Wang Li. As the saying goes, if you help someone, help them to the end. No matter what, I couldn't watch little Wang Li die for no reason. Chapter 452. Zhang Kanwen closed his eyes and pondered for a while. He seemed to be organizing his words. I knew this wasn't a trivial matter, so I didn't rush him. I just played with little Wang Li while looking at him with bright eyes. Around 1 minute later, Zhang Kanwen opened his eyes. With a solemn face, he told me what had happened. That day, I cast a spell on little Wang Li as usual. It's been like this every day. Little Wang Li got used to it. When I cast the spell, his body would be wrapped in Tao energy, and he would lie there motionlessly. After I finished casting the spell, he would start to break free and move around. My Wenshan cultivation technique has a miraculous effect on suppressing evil beings. Little Wang Li had been nurtured by me for a long time, and his body had become stronger. It seemed that the evil being's influence on him was slowly weakening. At that time, I was confident that it wouldn't be a problem to help little Wang Li get through these 2 years. But who would have thought that when I cast a spell to nurse him back to health that day, little Wang Li suddenly became very agitated. He bared his teeth and shouted. Later, he became even more restless. His legs and feet kicked around randomly. His emotions were very unstable. Zhang Kanwen recalled the situation and felt a little scared. After a moment of silence, he continued, "At first, I thought it was just a child throwing a tantrum, so I didn't care and continued to cast the spell. But when I was casting the Wenshan spell, little Wang Li's body became more and more restless. All kinds of meridians appeared on his arms, and his blood vessels suddenly bulged. It was as if I had just woken up from a dream. I knew that the evil being had awakened. I couldn't imagine how a chubby baby could have all the meridians in his body bulging. I couldn't wait to ask, what happened after that? At that time, I realized that something was wrong, so I quickly stopped casting the spell and went to check on little Wang Li. Who knew that at this time, little Wang Li suddenly sat up and looked at me angrily. Then, he reached out and tapped my lower abdomen. "That's how you got hurt?" I pointed at Zhang Kanwen's arm. Zhang Kanwen smiled wryly. "Not only that, but the 6th Tao energy source stone that had just formed in my body was also smashed by him." "What?" I opened my eyes wide. I remembered that Zhang Kanwen had mentioned to me in the Feng Shui metaphysics shop that he could vaguely feel that he could break through to the 6-star knowledge realm. Zhang Kanwen was a cultivation genius, and with the protection of the Wenshan cultivation technique, breaking through to the 6-star knowledge realm was just a matter of time for him. I didn't expect that the 6th Tao energy source stone that had just formed would be smashed by little Wang Li's finger. I had met countless masters before, including some heavenly masters. But after so many fierce battles, no one had been able to break the Tao energy source stone in my body. For cultivators, cultivation was like a second life. Once the Tao Qi source stone was formed in a person's body, it would become a part of the person's body and would not change easily. The Tao Qi source stone in his body was shattered, and the feeling was as if a certain organ in the human body had been smashed, and it was even more serious because the Tao Qi source stone at the bottom of the mortal heaven meridian was a body of energy, and it contained a huge amount of energy and was extremely tough. Little Wang Xiaodo, but how and how much, how little kid, how it contained. I gawked and couldn't believe what Zhang Kanwen had just said. If that was the case, then the cultivation of the evil creature residing in little Wang Li's body was not much lower than that of the sacrificial evil spirit. Once this thing awakens, let alone the two of us, I'm afraid that even the old president, who's always elusive, might not be a match for it. If such an evil being were to come out of seclusion, who could stop it? Probably noticing my expression, Zhang Canwen smiled bitterly and said helplessly, "You don't believe me. When little Wang Li injured me, Lu Chuanda and Xie Chenghua came in. Little Wang Li just stared at them and the two of them were heavily injured, they almost died." My expression became solemn. The first time I had met the sacrificial evil spirit, he had injured me and Chen Yongting with just a glance. Even Yen Nantian couldn't withstand the might of his gaze. This detail further proved how terrifying the evil being hiding in little Wang Li's body was. However, I still had my doubts about Zhang Canwen's Dao, Qi, and Zhang Canwen's origin stone being shattered. After thinking for a moment, I activated my spell. I held little Wang Li with my left hand and formed a strange gesture with my right thumb and ring finger. I gently tapped on my glabella and chanted, "Wang." Instantly, a golden slit appeared between my eyebrows. It was like a third eye that had appeared out of nowhere, and I looked at the bottom of Zhang Canwen's veins of the sky. This spell was called the Wang Formula. It was a spell that could only be mastered at the Sky Master realm. Although I hadn't officially reached the Sky Master realm yet, after mastering the 9-star Heavenly Dipper, mastering this spell was only a matter of time. After activating the spell, the golden slit between my eyebrows released a few streaks of golden light that silently shot towards Zhang Canwen. Instantly, I could see the movement of Zhang Canwen's veins of the sky and meridians. After activating the Wang Formula, a Sky Master could open his Sky Eye. At that time, everything in the Earth Master's body would be seen by the Sky Master. This was also why the Earth Master had no secrets in his eyes. The 5 neatly arranged origin stones at the bottom of Zhang Canwen's veins of the sky were slightly erratic. The white Tao energy flowed through his body along his 8 extraordinary meridians. Apart from the slight delay at his injured right arm, the other parts of his body were unobstructed. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with it. What was going on? After a cultivator's Tao Qi origin stone was shattered, it would be the same as an injury to his internal organs. There would definitely be some traces left behind. But why couldn't Zhang Canwen, who had the 6th Tao Qi origin stone, be able to see anything? I was puzzled. I grabbed the jade bracelet with my right hand and desperately absorbed the true dragon's Qi, activating the secret spell again. At that moment, the arrangement at the bottom of Zhang Canwen's veins of the sky became clearer. I examined it for a long time before I finally found some clues. Although there were 5 Tao Qi origin stones neatly arranged at the bottom of Zhang Canwen's veins of the sky, there were some white dregs next to the origin stones. They looked a little like gravel. They were very small and couldn't be seen without looking carefully. In the process of cultivation, the origin stone was formed the moment the Tao broke through. In other words, a person at the 5-star knowledge realm could only have 5 origin stones in their body. There wouldn't be any more than that. In other words, the gravel at the bottom of Zhang Canwen's veins of the sky was left behind when the 6th Tao Qi origin stone was shattered. The origin stone was originally an energy body formed by Tao or Shaman Qi. It was as tough as steel. It was impossible for ordinary power to shatter it. It was hard to imagine how much external power Zhang Canwen had endured. I let out a long sigh. I had no choice but to believe it now. It seemed that the evil being residing in little Wang Li's body had an extraordinary cultivation. Otherwise, how could it have such power? It had forcefully shattered the Tao Qi origin stone. This power was simply beyond my imagination. If the evil being hadn't been in a deep sleep and wasn't familiar with its power, I'm afraid that it would have killed Zhang Canwen on the spot. No wonder Lu Chuanda was so scared back at the hotel. I sighed and retracted my heaven eye. I shook my head and said, "This power is unbelievable." Zhang Canwen was knowledgeable and wasn't curious about me using the Wang formula. He said seriously, "The evil being residing in Sister Tong Zihua's body is restricted by the tunnel, so it can only use 1% or even 1,000th of its power. Even so, I can't fight back at all. I'm worried that if this evil being awakens one day, no one will be its match. Looking at little Wang Li, who was sleeping soundly in my arms, I was a little annoyed. Was it right for me to insist on saving this child? Now that the evil being residing in little Wang Li's body was so strong, even if I summoned the sacrificial evil spirit, it might not be its match. What should I do? Zhang Canwen seemed to see through my thoughts and said firmly, "Zhou, the evil being in little Wang Li's body has an extraordinary cultivation. If you and I can't stop this evil being from coming out of seclusion, I will definitely kill little Wang Li. I know you can't bear to do that, and neither can I. But I've thought about it carefully during this time. If this evil being comes out of seclusion, it won't harm little Wang Li alone. I can't ignore the people in the world just because of little Wang Li." Zhang Canwen's face was very serious, and his tone didn't waver. It was obvious that he had already made up his mind. I sighed dejectedly and didn't know what to say. I just hoped that day would come later and that little Wang Li would give me more time. Back then, I insisted on saving little Wang Li and dug this pit myself. Now, I could only bury it myself. But now I thought about it again. Wang Kuan had just become a father, and he was already involved in such an accident. Little Wang Li was just an innocent baby. Didn't he have the right to live? Did I really have to let this harmless baby in my arms die for the so-called people in the world? Little Wang Li was fast asleep in my arms, snoring softly. He was no different from an ordinary baby. Shouldn't he be able to enjoy the happiness of his family like an ordinary child? Thinking about this, I gritted my teeth and said, "Brother Zhang, give me 1 year. I will definitely save little Wang Li." I had Tong Tong, the snake spirit, Shao Jin, and the sacrificial evil spirit. Moreover, my current realm was just a step away from the heavenly master realm. Give me 1 year to prepare. Could I let this evil being overturn the sky? Although I was deceiving myself, I still comforted myself. However, Zhang Canwen didn't seem to agree with my confidence. He waved his hand and said with a wry smile, "I'm afraid you don't have 1 year. In theory, little Wang Li should have 1.5 years of peace after he passes the half-year mark. But now that the evil being has awakened, it means that the evil spirit's bloodline is awakening faster. Maybe in half a year, or even 2 months, the evil being will completely awaken. At that time, it will break out of little Wang Li's body. If we don't kill Wang Li before that, when the evil being breaks out, I'm afraid the world will become a charaba." Zhang Canwen's words were like a bucket of cold water pouring down on me, extinguishing the last bit of my confidence. However, I couldn't help but look at little Wang Li in my arms. Everyone had the right to live. Little Wang Li was just an innocent baby. Why did he have to bear so many things that he shouldn't have? "Brother Zhang, I must save little Wang Li. If I don't succeed, I'll die for a good cause. No matter what, I can't watch little Wang Li die for no reason. If we try our best and still can't save him, I have no objection to killing him. But if you want to determine his fate just because of the possibility of the future, I can't agree." It was probably because I thought of my parents who had died long ago that I felt a little emotional. Everyone had the right to live. Wasn't it every child's dream to be at their mother's knee? What's more, putting myself in his shoes, if I were little Wang Li and my fate was decided by others before I was born, how could I be reconciled to it? The lives of the people in the world were indeed important. I understood the principle of choosing the lesser of two evils, but to little Wang Li, his life was everything. The people in the world had the right to live, and so did he. Chapter 453. After listening to my words, Zhang Canwen didn't say anything else. After a moment of silence, he sighed and said, "Since you insist, then try it. But Zhou, you have to remember that after we try, if we still can't get rid of that evil thing, or if I find that we don't have the ability to deal with that evil thing, I will risk my life to kill Wang Li and stop that evil thing from being born. At that time, don't stop me again." I didn't say anything else and just nodded. Obviously, this was Zhang Canwen's bottom line. In fact, I also knew that if we didn't nip the danger in the bud, it would be hard to say if we still had the ability to kill Wang Li when that evil thing was born. But after all, there was still time and hope. It was far from the time of despair. After we looked at each other in silence for a while, Zhang Canwen suddenly took out something that looked like a magic artifact. This thing was square and wrapped in a piece of yellow silk. Without using my spiritual sense, I could easily feel that this thing was emitting a strong Dao aura. It wasn't strange that a magic artifact that a feng shui master nurtured could emit Dao aura, but what was strange was that the magic artifact in Zhang Canwen's hand was emitting a strong Dao aura. Even with my current cultivation, I felt a little shocked. I even faintly felt an aura similar to the aura around the Xianyuan sword's sword case. What kind of magic artifact was this to have such an aura? Zhang Canwen didn't say anything. Instead, he put the square magic artifact on the table in front of him and carefully opened the yellow silk covering the surface. Under the yellow silk was an ink stone that faintly glowed with a cold light. Without cover, the strong Dao aura of the inkstone magic artifact spread out without any regard for the cost. It was like a small dragon vein. "Brother Zhang, this is?" I couldn't help but ask, what kind of magic artifact could have such an aura? Even without using it, one could tell that the power of this magic tool was extraordinary. Why did Zhang Canwen suddenly take this thing out for me to see? Zhang Canwen's expression was solemn, like a soldier being inspected. He held the inkstone and said solemnly, "This magic artifact is the treasure of my Mount Wen lineage, Mount Wen inkstone. Wen Shanyan? I have seen many celestial artifacts of the celestial master, but I have never seen such a tyrannical celestial artifact. The intensity of the Taoist qi that it exudes is even far from that of the stone of Mount Tai that I saw in Shenzhen Metaphysics. Furthermore, this was merely an enchanted item. It was not like the stone of Mount Tai that was nurtured by the heavens and the earth. For it to have such a strong magnetic field was truly inconceivable." Zhang Canwen wasn't in a hurry to tell me about Wen Shanyan's background, but first smiled and said, "Aren't you surprised that I can see through your glorious consciousness great perfection realm with my glorious consciousness 5-star realm? Logically speaking, it was impossible for a person with a lower cultivation to see through a person with a higher cultivation. This was common sense." I nodded. "Of course I'm surprised. Could it be because of Wen Shanyan? Could it be that this Wen Shanyan is like my 8th step astral, allowing people to see through everything?" Zhang Canwen affirmed, "That's right, it's because I have the Wen Shanyan with me that I can see through your cultivation. The Dao Qi that this enchanted item is emitting is so thick, but why didn't I sense anything when you brought it with you? This Wen Shanyan was simply too strange. Although the celestial master enchanted items that I had seen before were powerful, they were rarely able to conceal their aura. How did this Wen Shanyan do it? Not only can Wen Shanyan see through your cultivation, but he can also conceal his aura. Unless your cultivation is higher than ancestor Wen Tianxiang, you definitely won't be able to sense its aura. Furthermore, as long as I don't take it out, you won't be able to find it even if you search my entire body," Zhang Canwen said calmly. His words shocked me. This Wen Shanyan had completely subverted my understanding. Concealing aura was still alright. On the path of cultivation, there were all sorts of miraculous spells and enchanted items. Concealment wasn't anything special. What I found strange was his last sentence. As long as he didn't take it out, a person with a high cultivation wouldn't be able to find it even if they searched his body. This was extraordinary. Enchanted items, no matter how miraculous they were still inanimate objects. They had to be controlled by a person in order to display their might. If no one was controlling them, They wouldn't be much different from other inanimate objects. However, the meaning behind Zhang Canwen's words was clear. This enchanted item could conceal itself and didn't require human control. Could it be that this enchanted item has given birth to an artifact spirit? I couldn't help but blurt out the thought that popped up in my mind. The word artifact spirit wasn't unfamiliar to me. Back when I first discovered the serpent spirit, I thought it was the artifact spirit of the ancient Luopan. Back then, my cultivation was still shallow and I only knew about artifact spirits, but I didn't know what they were. In reality, the serpent spirit could only be considered a fake artifact spirit, not a true one. The serpent spirit was merely a soul that lived inside the Luopan. A true artifact spirit was created out of nothing, from within the enchanted item. Anything with intelligence could be called a living being. Essentially, creating something out of nothing was the birth of life. It was an extremely difficult process. Even a heavenly master couldn't understand the principles behind it, much less set foot in it. That was why I had never seen an enchanted item with a true artifact spirit after so many years. Who knew that I would see one in Zhang Canwen's hands today? However, I still had some doubts. Was there really an artifact spirit in this inkstone? Hearing my question, Zhang Canwen was slightly surprised, but he still answered calmly, "That's right. This one Shanyan has indeed developed intelligence." My eyes widened again. Enchanted items were nurtured by a feng shui master, so it wasn't strange for it to develop magic power or be contaminated with Tao energy. However, developing intelligence was something that could only be found by chance. Not only did it require a feng shui master's cultivation to surpass a heavenly master's realm, but it also required all sorts of opportunities. The chances were like finding a needle in a haystack. What kind of opportunity did Wen Shanyan's lineage have to obtain such a treasure? I exhaled and calmed down a little. Then, I continued to ask, where did this Wen Shanyan come from? Zhang Canwen took the sleeping little Wang Li and handed me the Wen Shanyan so that I could carefully feel the aura on it. I calmed my mind, but my palms couldn't help but feel hot. I scanned it with my spiritual sense and immediately felt a strong grudge aura. That's right, it was a grudge. For a moment, it was as if I was in an ancient battlefield. Two groups of people were fighting with their lives on the line. Swords pierced through flesh and blood, and flesh flew everywhere. It seemed that each of the fierce warriors had a great hatred in their hearts, and they wanted to kill each other as soon as they saw each other. My spiritual sense had only probed for a few seconds when I felt my head swell. The grudge aura was like a needle being injected into my body. In an instant, my eyeballs swelled, and my murderous aura rose. The veins on my palms couldn't help but bulge. I was in a state of near berserk. At the same time, the Tao energy in my body suddenly became manic. The Tao energy that had been nourishing the 8 extraordinary meridians seemed to have turned into sharp needles that pricked my meridians. It was very uncomfortable. In a split second, the curse in my body expanded like a balloon that was being inflated. Brother Zhou, you don't need to circulate your energy to resist it. You just need to silently say, the Yuan dynasty is only 100 years old. Just as I was on the verge of going berserk, Zhang Canwen's voice rang in my ears like a bell. I did as he said. My originally manic meridians suddenly calmed down, and the Tao energy started to circulate gently like before. The other cycle of shaman energy didn't fluctuate like before, and everything returned to normal. In an instant, my body returned to normal. There was no transition in between. I asked Zhang Canwen, what kind of spell was that? I looked at the Wen Shan inkstone in my hand with lingering fear. When the artifact exerted its power, I couldn't even think of resisting. That feeling was similar to when I faced the Lu family's celestial master when I was still in the early stages of glory of consciousness. I couldn't control my body at all, and my entire body was being controlled. It wasn't a spell, just a simple sentence, Zhang Canwen said. But how could a simple sentence make such a powerful artifact retract its power? What was the story behind it? Zhang Canwen's artifact was really unimaginable. Zhang Canwen said, "This Wenshan inkstone was an artifact that my ancestor, Wen Tianxiang, had nurtured since he was young. My ancestor's cultivation wasn't ordinary, so this artifact was naturally nurtured into an extraordinary power. After my ancestor was defeated and captured, he was imprisoned by the Mongolians. He knew that he didn't have long to live, so before he died, he spat his blood on this Wenshan inkstone, cursing the Yuan dynasty to be only 100 years old. That's why this artifact has such a strong curse. Moreover, this Wenshan inkstone has already developed intelligence, so you just need to silently say, 'The Yuan dynasty is only 100 years old,' and you will be able to unseal the power of this inkstone." Zhang Canwen's story was shocking to me. So there was such a story hidden in history. From this story, this Wenshan inkstone seemed to be much stronger than I had imagined. The fate of a nation was very illusory, but just like the heavenly Tao, it was illusory yet real. Moreover, it was incomparably strong, and it wasn't something that a human could fight against. But this inkstone could actually curse the fate of a nation. This kind of power didn't belong to a human. When Tianxiang was able to create the dragon vein and summon the sacrificial evil spirit, so his cultivation wasn't ordinary. At the very least, he was at the peak of the Yang God celestial master level. This Wenshan inkstone had Wen Tianxiang's blood and cursed the fate of the Yuan dynasty, so it made sense that it could develop intelligence. At that time, when the Meizhou branch's president coveted the Wenshan lineage, he was able to attract the full help of the Liu family in the capital. I believed that the Liu family also coveted the Wenshan inkstone. However, why did Zhang Canwen show me this Wenshan inkstone? Since the Wenshan inkstone was the Wenshan lineage's treasure, it shouldn't be easily shown to others. Why did Zhang Canwen do this? This treasure is so exquisite. As the saying goes, treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. Naturally, the less people know about this, the better. Why did Brother Zhang show me this item? Zhang Canwen shook the sleeping little Wang Li in his arms. Isn't it because of him? Could this thing help little Wang Li overcome his difficulties? I suddenly became spirited. Brother Zhang, have you already thought of a way to save little Wang Li? Zhang Canwen shook his head. It's just an idea. I don't know if it will work or not. Magic tools like inkstones and paperweights have a suppressive power. The Wenshan inkstone is even more so. When it exerts force, it feels like a 10,000 gene cauldron is pressing down on a person's body. No matter what it is, it will be extremely difficult to bear. According to my original plan, if we want to save little Wang Li, we have to force our way into the pit and fight against the evil creature hiding inside. I believe you also have the same plan. But have you ever thought that although the pit looks shallow, it's actually a mountain that can kill a horse? There are thousands of ravines inside. Not to mention whether or not we can defeat the evil creature, just entering it and looking for it will cost us a lot of energy. So, after careful consideration, I decided that instead of killing the evil creature, it would be better to suppress it. Although this method is a bit conservative, it has a higher chance of success. And to use the suppression method, we need a top suppressive magic tool. You mean to say that when the evil creature wakes up, we should use this Wenshan inkstone to suppress it? Zhang Canwen said it with certainty, and my heart gave birth to hope. That's right. Zhang Canwen nodded and continued, when the evil creature wakes up, its body will instantly increase by thousands of times and break out of the pit. At that time, we will use this Wenshan inkstone to suppress it in one fell swoop. This inkstone can suppress the fate of a country, so it should be able to suppress this evil creature. And the reason why I took out this Wenshan inkstone is because I want you to use a secret technique to activate this Wenshan inkstone. Let me activate the Wen Shan Inkstone? I said in surprise. Logically speaking, this Wen Shan Inkstone is a magic tool of the Wen Shan lineage. It's already very rare for Zhang Kanwen to show it to me. Why would he want me to activate this Wen Shan Inkstone? That's right, this matter can only be done by you. Now that my Dao Qi Source Stone has been shattered, my cultivation can't advance in a short period of time. And if you want to activate this Wen Shan Inkstone, you need at least the cultivation of a heavenly master. The reason why I didn't mention this before was because first, it was just a guess of mine. Second, you and I haven't reached the heavenly master realm. Although you are only a fine line away from the heavenly master realm, many times, a fine line is the difference between heaven and earth. But since you insist on saving little Wang Li, the only thing I can do is to tell you this method. And you must quickly break through that barrier and reach the heavenly master realm. Chapter 454. Every cultivator wanted to reach the heavens in one step and become a heavenly master. For this purpose, who knows how many people would take the risk of being condemned by the world, but in the end, how many people could successfully advance to heavenly master? It was already not easy to advance to glory consciousness great perfection. Just like Zhang Kanwen said, although it was only a fine line, it was like a chasm. How many people stayed at glory consciousness great perfection for their entire lives, unable to advance? It was said to be a thin layer of window paper, but in reality, it was an insurmountable chasm. Strictly speaking, I was lucky. After absorbing the huge amount of shaman energy in Tai Sui's body, my cultivation improved greatly. The amount of shaman energy in my body was dozens of times that of an ordinary glory consciousness great perfection cultivator. I was afraid that it was not inferior to those young god heavenly masters. More importantly, I was very sure that I had already pushed open the door of Tao. As long as I was willing, I could advance to heavenly master at any time. That insurmountable chasm, I have already crossed it. For me, the chasm was not in cultivation, but in the 2 Miaojiang ancestral venomous insects in my body. A lifetime of bitter cultivation, but in the end it was a wedding dress for others. No one would be willing to encounter such a thing. Therefore, before I resolved the hidden danger in my body, it was impossible for me to forcefully advance to heavenly master. I thought that I had a benevolent heart, but I couldn't do the saintly act of cutting off my own flesh to feed an eagle. Little Wang Li's life was very important. As long as it was within my ability, I would definitely save him, even if I had to sacrifice some of my own interests and take some risk. But this didn't mean that I would ignore the hidden danger in my body and risk everything to save him. I wasn't that kind of saint after all. It was just that this way, I couldn't help but feel a little guilty in my heart. I stood there for a long time without saying anything. After a long time, I sighed. For now, I could only wait for the sacrificial evil spirit to return quickly and help me solve the trouble in my body. It was just that I didn't have much confidence. The sacrificial evil spirit's origin was mysterious, and it had always been seen and not seen. I really didn't know when he would return. Seeing that I didn't speak for a long time, Zhang Kanwen frowned and asked, "Zhou Yi, are you not confident?" I shook my head and smiled bitterly, but I didn't mention my predicament. I sighed. Breaking through realms has always depended on luck. It doesn't matter if you have confidence or not. Luck is the most elusive thing. I really can't say for sure. Let's not talk about me. I remember that Brother Zhang has the Song of Righteousness that can help you reach the Heavenly Master realm temporarily. When the time comes, can you use the power of the ancient book to activate Wen Shan Yen? Zhang Kanwen had used the ancient copy of the Song of Righteousness many times in the mausoleum of the Shang dynasty to enter the realm of the Heavenly Master for a short period of time. I didn't think of this before, but now, as I spoke, I suddenly had this thought. Thinking about this, my heart calmed down slightly. If this method worked, then it couldn't be any better. I wouldn't have to be so conflicted in my heart. Unfortunately, things weren't as simple as I thought. After Zhang Canwen heard my words, he immediately shook his head and said, "If that's the case, why would I have the thought of killing little Wang Li? That evil being's cultivation is very high. Using Wen Shan Yen to suppress it is just an idea of mine. I can't be sure whether it will succeed or not. At most, I only have a 70 to 80% chance of success. Even if I don't consider this, the process of suppressing it won't be completed in one go. I used one page of the ancient book to help me reach the Heavenly Master realm for 4 hours. Although it's called Heavenly Master, it's still far from the real Heavenly Master realm. And this Wen Shan Yen is a spiritual immortal artifact. Activating it requires even more majestic Dao Qi. At that time, my cultivation as a pseudo-heavenly master is far from enough. So, Zhou Yi, if you want to save little Wang Li, you still have to rely on your advancement to the heavenly master realm to have a glimmer of hope. Using external objects and truly reaching the heavenly master realm were indeed different, and the difference was quite large. I naturally understood this principle. In fact, when I asked that question just now, I already knew this would be the result, but I still had a trace of fantasy in my heart. After this fantasy was completely shattered, I didn't think too much about it. Because I was worried that I would hurt Zhang Canwen, I didn't mention the predicament I was facing. I just said lightly, "After all, there's still time. I will definitely try my best to advance to the Heavenly Master realm." Zhang Canwen nodded and didn't say anything more. He reached out to take little Wang Li from my arms and said, "It's getting late. You must be tired after a long journey. Rest early. We'll visit little Wang Li tomorrow." At this moment, the sky was indeed very late. After saying goodnight to Zhang Canwen, I walked away. Who knew that when I reached the door, I would see Wang Yongjun, Wang Kuan, and his wife the moment I opened the door. At this moment, the three of them were tiptoeing outside. When I suddenly walked out, the three of them were startled. Their bodies paused on the spot, and their faces were slightly embarrassed. When I was talking just now, I heard some movement outside the door. However, because I didn't feel any fluctuation of Dao Qi, I didn't pay much attention to it. I didn't think that this family would come to eavesdrop on my conversation with Zhang Canwen. This Master Zhou Wang Kuan scratched his head and his face was slightly red. He was caught eavesdropping. At that moment, he didn't know whether to leave or stay. He was so embarrassed that he didn't know where to put his hands. Actually, their reactions were already fast enough. However, I already had the cultivation of a quasi-heavenly master. My pace was also much faster than ordinary people. The speed at which I came out of the house was so fast that they couldn't escape in time. "Master Zhou, Master Zhang, we heard what you said just now. Thank you for doing your best to save Wang Li. Wang Yongjun, thank you here. Wang Kuan, come over and kowtow to the two masters. Thank the two masters for saving his life." Wang Yongjun was experienced. He didn't say anything more about eavesdropping. Instead, he pulled Wang Kuan to kneel before Zhang Canwen and me. After Wang Kuan and his wife knelt down, Wang Yongjun said, "Master Zhou and Master Zhang, please don't blame us. Our family was also very afraid when Wang Li injured Master Zhang. We couldn't think of a reason. This time, when I saw the two of you talking in secret, I really couldn't hold it in. I was too abrupt and offended the two masters." Wang Yongjun's face was pale. He was grateful and apologetic, but at the same time, he was a little panicked. After saying that, he knocked his head on the ground heavily. Ever since I came to Shenzhen to solve the matter of the Gu poison woman, I had a lot of contact with Wang Yongjun over the years. In his heart, I was probably a godlike figure. Zhang Canwen was also quite famous in Guangzhou. I reckoned that in Wang Yongjun's heart, the two of us were the only people who could save little Wang Li. Therefore, this business giant who had been in the business world for many years actually knelt and kowtowed personally to ask for help. Wang Yongjun, who had no children, had always regarded Wang Kuan as his own. He even treated little Wang Li as his own grandson. Masters, please save little Wang Li. No matter how much money I spend, I, Wang Yongjun, won't even frown. As Wang Yongjun spoke, he couldn't help but burst into tears. At his age, money was no longer important. What was important was the health of his family and the happiness of his family. Wang Kuan and his wife, who had just become parents for the first time, were crying even more. Their tears flowed freely, especially Wang Kuan's wife, who had already burst into tears. Little Wang Li in my arms was all their hope. For this family in front of me, there was nothing more important than this evil-possessed baby. I've seen this saying before. How can one prove that a person has stayed in this world for a while? Money? There will always be a time when it's spent. Property? There will always be a time when it's demolished and rebuilt. The best evidence to prove that a person has been in this world for a while is to leave behind children. Incense can grow and multiply endlessly, like a baton passed on from generation to generation. The sleeping baby in my arms is the incense that passes on the baton of this family in front of me. I could understand how much of a blow Wang Kuan and his wife would feel if they lost this child. I could understand how much pain Wang Yongjun, who was over 50 years old, would feel if he lost this grandson. Didn't I just go through a huge change in my family? The tree wants peace, but the wind doesn't stop. The tearful looks of the three people in front of me reminded me of my parents, the hard-working and honest father and the nagging mother. Weren't my parents like that when the Liu family's bastards threatened me? Back then, in order to save me, my parents kept kowtowing to the Liu family's bastards. Didn't they also do it to save my life? As parents, they actually didn't have any extravagant hopes for their children, they just hoped that their children could live well. Now, the hearts of the three people in front of me are probably not much different from what my parents thought back then. At this moment, I was still holding little Wang Li in my arms. I quickly passed little Wang Li to Wang Kuan's wife and pulled Wang Yongjun. Uncle Wang, quickly get up. The ground is cold. Little Wang Li and I hit it off very well. I will definitely try my best to save him. Zhang Canwen seemed to be greatly moved. He quickly helped them up. You are also muddle-headed. I am little Wang Li's master, and I have just received the ceremony of becoming his disciple. You want to save him, so how can I bear to see him die? My Wang family is here to thank the two of you for your great kindness. The two of us finally managed to pull the three of them up. Wang Yongjun was extremely excited. He even said that if we could cure little Wang Li, he wouldn't hesitate to take out half of his family's assets to thank us. Zhang Canwen and I were both cultivators, so we didn't care much about money. We didn't mind his words. After comforting them for a long time, they finally calmed down and left with their children. Looking at the lonely silhouettes of this family as they left, I felt even more upset. To the people of the world, little Wang Li was now a great threat. The person living in the pit in his chest might be an evildoer with extremely high cultivation. If he was allowed to come into being, it was not impossible for him to destroy all living beings. But to the Wang family, little Wang Li was just a newborn baby, the only hope of their family. Not to mention that Wang Yongjun has always been a great help to me. I will definitely do my best to protect this little Wang Li who loves to cry and laugh. But the goo in my body. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but sigh. Zhang Canwen wasn't as conflicted as I was, but his unshaven face looked more determined. No matter what, I will do my best. It's just that there's still a long way to go. He is different from me, just like how he would rather kill little Wang Li than let the evil thing in little Wang Li's body come out and wreak havoc in the world. If we were in the same situation right now, I believe that he will definitely choose to sacrifice himself for justice. People are different, so I won't feel ashamed. It's just that the apologetic feeling in my heart grew deeper, and at the same time, there was a sense of helplessness in my heart. Zhang Canwen is willing to sacrifice himself for justice, but there's no other way. I have a way, but I can't abandon life and death. Most things in the world are like this, and there's nothing I can do. After a moment of silence, both of us felt a little heavy. We didn't speak again and returned to our rooms. After the feng shui metaphysics shop was rebuilt, the internal structure was also changed a lot. The room that was specially prepared for me was very big, and it was decorated in traditional Chinese style. There was a huge landscape painting screen, the gold-plated walls, and the exquisite wooden bed. The floor wasn't modern, but ancient blue bricks. There was an exquisite tea set on the round table in the living room. There was a set of brush, ink, paper, and inkstone on the log desk. Even the pillars were carved with various exquisite patterns. It was obvious that they had put a lot of effort into it. At this time, my mood was a little heavy, and I wasn't in the mood to admire the surroundings. After entering the door, I took off my shoes and lay on the bed, continuing to think about how to save little Wang Li. Until now, I didn't know much about the evil thing in little Wang Li's body. Other than knowing that this thing's cultivation was very high, I knew almost nothing. But that wasn't important. The only important thing was whether I could become a heavenly master. Chapter 455. According to feng shui metaphysics, it wasn't good to have too many mirrors in the bedroom as it would damage one's luck. I looked around and found that there was only one bronze mirror on the washstand in my room. The bedroom was decorated according to the ancient style, which was to control the feng shui of this place. Besides a copper basin and a few towels on the wooden washstand, there was also a bronze mirror. The bronze mirror wasn't big, but it was big enough to reflect half of my body. I took off my shirt and began to observe the tattoo on my chest and back. The tattoo on my chest had a lion's head, deer's antlers, tiger's eyes, elk's body, dragon's scales, an ox's tail, and a horn with meat. Together with the huge body underneath, it was an obvious Qilin tattoo. As my cultivation base increased, the tattoo on my chest had changed from a simple Qilin head to a vivid Qilin tattoo. However, when I looked carefully, I frowned. When the Qilin goo was first planted, there was a faint Qilin tattoo on my body. As my cultivation base increased, the tattoo also grew. The longest Qilin horn had reached my collarbone, and its body had grown to my abdomen. According to what Yang Shilong had said, as the cultivation base of the victim increased, the Qilin goo would also grow until it broke out of the ground. Of course, I wasn't surprised by this, but the color of the Qilin. When the Qilin goo was first planted, the Qilin tattoo was a mixture of dark green and dark green. Later, as the tattoo grew, the color became darker and darker until it was as black as ink. According to Yang Shilong, the deeper the goo was, the darker the ink would be. When the victim broke through to the heavenly mentor level, the Kirin goo would turn into the darkest black color. It would then break free from the victim and fly into the sky. However, as I cultivated, the color of the Qilin goo became lighter. I hadn't noticed it before, but now I realized that the dark green Qilin goo had turned into a light black color. It was strange. According to the ancient records of the Qilin goo had fused with the human goo. The human's cultivation base was the Qilin goo's cultivation base. In other words, as my cultivation base increased, the Qilin tattoo on my body would become darker. When I reached the heavenly master realm, the Qilin goo would turn into the darkest black color. Then, it would leave my body and return to the old witch in Miaojiang. But now that my realm had increased and I was close to breaking through to the heavenly master realm, the Qilin goo would turn into the darkest black color. Then, it would leave my body and fly back to the old witch in Miaojiang. The Kirin goo was cultivated by the people of Miaojiang with great effort. It had a huge amount of energy, and as it continued to absorb the energy of the person who was poisoned, the energy in it would become thicker and thicker. It could be said that the lines that formed the tattoo were huge energy bodies. But since it was an energy body, as it absorbed more and more energy, there was no reason for the lines of the tattoo to become fainter and fainter. Chi to goo 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 chi to be much it to it t it and had to absorb. Chilin to the chilin goo energy. Shaking my head, I put this question aside for the time being and turned to look at the back. On my back, the ink dragon tattoo was still vivid and lifelike. When the snake spirit had returned, it had said that it needed the saliva of the real dragon to transform. In other words, it needed the blood of the person who had swallowed the dragon's saliva. That was why it had possessed my body. Strictly speaking, the snake spirit dragon wasn't the one that the old witch had implanted in me. I had willingly accepted it. Following the snake spirit's transformation, the color of the ink dragon tattoo became darker. The vivid expression was like a real ink dragon hovering in the sky, looking down on everything. But why was the color of the chilin on my chest getting lighter and lighter, while the ink dragon's color was so thick? Still suspicious, I summoned the snake spirit. I, Lord Snake Immortal, am currently sleeping. Which idiot dares to disturb my peace? Aren't you afraid that I'll swallow you alive? The snake spirit that I had summoned seemed to be hibernating. It didn't even lift its eyes as it shouted arrogantly. It was still as lively as ever. I said angrily, "I'm the one who woke you up. I have something to ask you." When the spirit snake heard my voice, he blushed and came closer. "Oh, it's you, Brother Zhou. I was sleeping just now. I didn't expect that you would call me. If I had known earlier, I would have come here. You wouldn't have needed to summon me. I told you, the voice that called me was powerful." After transforming, the snake spirit had the appearance of a beautiful boy. However, its duck voice hadn't changed. It made people feel uncomfortable. I waved my hand and interrupted the snake spirit. "All right, don't talk nonsense. I have something to ask you. Brother Zhou, if there's anything you don't know, just ask. As long as I know, as long as I know, I will tell you everything I know. If you need my help, just tell me. If you tell me to go east, I won't go west. If you tell me to beat the dog, you won't beat the dog, right?" I said coldly. This fellow's flattery was always simple and crude. Moreover, it was the same few lines that had been used for tens of thousands of years. It made people's hands itch, and they wanted to slap him. Hee. The snake spirit scratched its head embarrassedly. It rubbed its horn that had just grown out. "Brother Zhou, if you need anything, I will do my best, all right?" I hurried to interrupt him. If I let him talk, I didn't know what else he would say. I asked, "After the Kirin parasite is infected, will the color of the tattoo become darker as the victim's power increases?" It was a question that I already knew the answer to. As soon as I finished asking, the snake spirit said, "Of course. After the Kirin parasite resides in the human body, it will crazily absorb the victim's energy. It seems to have established some kind of restriction that allows it to share the same root and body with the victim. The Kirin parasite can instantly increase the victim's cultivation base. Its color will also change from greenish-black to black, then to black. Then, it will leave the human body and become a heavenly master parasite. The victim can also use this Kirin parasite to become a heavenly master. Many evil old parasite women in Miaojiang used this ability to become a heavenly master. The serpent spirit had lived in the jungles of the southern region before it died. It had been refined into a dragon goo, so it knew a lot about venomous insects. As soon as it heard my question, it told me everything it knew. Then, it looked at me as if it was asking for credit. It looked like a child waiting to be praised by its elders. I frowned. Indeed, it was like that. The Kirin tattoo on my body only appeared after I was infected with the Kirin parasite. To some extent, This tattoo was the Kirin parasite itself. But why did the Kirin parasite absorb my energy and cause its cultivation base to decrease? Then, why did my Kirin tattoo turn from greenish-black to light black 2 years after the old parasite woman infected me with the Kirin parasite? I asked the question in my heart and pointed at the tattoo on my chest. Since the Kirin parasite was planted, it would share the same root and body with the victim. It was a life parasite, but why didn't I feel such an existence in my body? I could summon the snake spirit just by residing in my body. But why didn't my consciousness notice that I had been infected with such a thing? There was no reason. The snake spirit looked at the tattoo on my body carefully. It seemed to be confused, but then it laughed. "Ha, that's right." The snake spirit laughed and said, "It must be because of me. Joey, it seems that I helped you a lot. How are you going to thank me? No matter how powerful the Kirin parasite is, it's just a small worm. My dragon race is the ancestor of worms. With me residing in your body, how would the small Kirin parasite dare to show off? This Kirin parasite is definitely afraid of me, so it doesn't dare to be presumptuous." The snake spirit laughed wildly, its mouth wide open, and it looked excited. The snake spirit still had the temperament of tearing down the roof if it wasn't beaten for 3 days. Now that it had just transformed into a human form, it actually dared to call itself a dragon. But when I lowered my head and thought about it, I felt that what he said wasn't right. If this Kirin parasite was really afraid of the snake spirit, how could there be a place for the Kirin parasite when the snake spirit resided in my body? Also, the Kirin parasite was a spiritual creature. If the snake spirit could suppress it, it should be easy to summon it. But I didn't hear it mention this. The snake spirit wasn't one to keep his words to himself. If he was really so powerful, he would have come over to take credit long ago. Why hadn't he done anything for so long? I pretended to be surprised and said, "Is what you said true?" "That's for sure. I, Lord Snake, have a peerless cultivation base. What kind of bubbles do you think you can blow under the palm of Lord Snake? Don't you know who I am? Back in the jungles of Nanjiang, I ate a parasite king like it was a meal. How could this small Kirin parasite not be afraid of me?" The snake spirit said arrogantly. I didn't expose it and just smiled. "If that's the case, you can definitely summon this Kirin parasite, right? How about this? I will call Tong Tong out. If you can summon the Kirin parasite to help me solve this problem, I will give you a big gift. If you can't, I will hand you over to Tong Tong. How about that?" The snake spirit was most likely bluffing. The Kirin parasite was the ancestor parasite of Miaojiang. Even the sacrificial evil spirit had seen it and specifically told me not to act rashly. How could the snake spirit suppress it? As expected, after I probed, the snake spirit became listless. "Brother Zhou, we are having a good discussion. Why do you have to call me Tong Tong?" Chapter 456. I automatically filtered out the snake spirit's words. Goo worms that could be used by Miaojiang's goo matron were not simple worms. The process of cultivating a goo worm was extremely complicated and bloody. At the same time, it was extremely cruel. The people of Miaojiang had known about goo and raising them since ancient times. They generally divided the process into 3 stages: preliminary selection, cultivation, and formation. In the preliminary stage, they would collect all kinds of poisonous insects and place them in a container, allowing them to kill each other and devour the corpses of their companions. The one who could survive to the end would be the best among them. But even so, this kind of tenacious poisonous insect was not enough to be called a goo. It just passed the preliminary stage. Next, after the selection, these poisonous insects would be raised by the person who raised them. They would be fed with 5-year scorpions, 10-year centipedes, and other poisonous things. This process was to awaken the poisonous insect's intelligence. The scorpion's lifespan was less than 5 years, and the centipede's lifespan was difficult to exceed 10 years. Although these poisonous creatures were not born with intelligence like humans, these old poisonous creatures would eventually develop a trace of intelligence. In the process of feeding, these poisonous insects gradually began to sprout intelligence. After a few years of feeding, these poisonous insects that had sprouted intelligence had to go through another round of fighting. This time, the remaining poisonous insects could officially enter the stage of becoming a goo. After being carefully fed by the person who raised the goo, they would gradually develop intelligence and obey the goo matron's orders. Then, they could finally be called a goo. It could be said that any goo worm was carefully raised by the person who raised the goo. After going through life and death battles again and again, it was not an exaggeration to describe it as outstanding. This was just an ordinary goo worm. As the ancestral goo of Miaojiang, the process of raising the Kirin goo was even more complicated and difficult. The Kirin goo was the natal goo, and it was born a powerful goo worm. It did not need to go through those battles and only needed to be fed carefully. However, in the process of feeding, the person who raised the goo not only had to find those old poisonous insects, but also had to feed it with their own flesh and blood from young, so that the goo worm would recognize their bloodline. Therefore, for ordinary goo worms, the human was the master and the goo was the servant. But for the ancestral goo, the goo was the master, and the human was just a servant to feed the parasite. Moreover, the Kirin goo took a long time to grow. It needed a bloodline connected to the family to feed it for a lifetime. The mother died and the daughter continued. It took several generations to successfully raise one. It was precisely because the process of raising it was so difficult that the Kirin goo had a strong and unique power. Because of this, the Kirin goo could stand at the top of the pyramid and become the king of goo worms. Ordinary goo worms had intelligence, and the Kirin goo's intelligence was no less than a human's. It definitely wouldn't become stupid after eating centipedes and scorpions. After pondering for a while, I shook my head and rejected the snake spirit's absurd idea. However, it was easy to overturn his words, but how could he explain the fact that the Qilin goo's energy was gradually weakening? The Qilin goo was an innate ancestral goo. During the feeding process, it did not eat ordinary insects. They were at least old poisonous insects that had sprouted Lingji. In fact, it even had to be fed with other goo worms. With such a method of feeding, one could only imagine the amount of energy contained in its body. Just like back then, the snake spirit was just a ghost, but with the help of the poisonous insects that the old witch fed and the true dragon saliva in my body, it was able to transform from a carp to a dragon. This also proved that the energy of these poisonous insects was extraordinary. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the 5 poisonous items that the old witch in Miao's territory had carefully prepared contained energy that wasn't inferior to the Taoist immortal medicines refined by the heavenly masters of Mount Longhu. Moreover, it was just the poisonous insect. During the process, the one who raised the goo had to use his own flesh and blood to feed them. The old witch's cultivation base wasn't high, but after dozens of years, she had accumulated a terrifying amount of energy. From this, I could guess what kind of energy this little Qilin goo had. According to the characteristics of ordinary goo worms, once they parasitized someone, they could continuously absorb energy from the host to strengthen themselves. I didn't know whether the Qilin goo was different from other goo worms, but even if it didn't absorb my energy, it could still be very strong. It wouldn't be like this. The lines that represented the energy of the Qilin goo didn't become thicker. Quite the contrary, they were becoming fainter. Why could the snake spirit use this energy to transform, but the Qilin goo in my body hadn't done anything since I had planted it? Now, it was getting weaker and weaker. The more I thought about it, the more I felt it was unbelievable. After pondering for a long time, I suddenly remembered what Yang Shilong had told me. He had said that before the Qilin goo broke out, it would continuously improve the host's innate talent, which would help the host's cultivation. At that time, I didn't pay much attention to it. However, now that I thought about it, I felt that it wasn't normal. The Qilin Gu could help the host's cultivation. What if the so-called help wasn't improving the host's innate talent like Yang Shilong had said? What if the Qilin Gu directly transferred its energy to my body? If that was the case, everything seemed to make sense. These years, my cultivation speed had been very fast. I was even faster than the geniuses of the cultivation families. On one hand, it was because of my hard work and all kinds of miraculous encounters. On the other hand, was it because of the Qilin Gu's secret help? And if it transferred its energy to my body, it would naturally weaken the Qilin Gu. My heart jumped. If that was the case, I was afraid that my view of the Qilin Gu would change. Previously, I had thought that the Qilin Gu's intelligence was comparable to a human's. But now, it seemed that it wasn't just comparable. The Qilin Gu's intelligence was obviously higher than a human's. Among humans who were born with peerless intelligence, how many of them could distinguish between gains and losses? But this Qilin Gu didn't hesitate to give up its energy to help me enter the Sky Master realm. There was a saying in philosophy that you could gain as much as you lose. This saying seemed to be very appropriate here. The Qilin Gu could give up its own energy to help me, and in the future, it could absorb all of my cultivation. It was like a cunning schemer hiding in my body, silently watching the plot that it had planted, waiting for the moment it would blossom and bear fruit. After staying silent for a long time, I asked the snake spirit again, "Did you feel the existence of the Qilin Gu in my body? Or did you feel a trace of its aura?" Maybe it saw my solemn expression, but the snake spirit didn't bullshit this time. It simply waved its hand, "No." This answer wasn't out of my expectations. In fact, it wasn't just the snake spirit. Even I didn't feel the existence of a Qilin Gu in my body. After such a long time, the Qilin Gu that the old Qilin Gu had given me didn't cause any discomfort in my body. I didn't even feel anything. In the past, if I couldn't feel the existence of the Qilin Gu, I would be secretly happy and think that I wouldn't be affected. But now I knew that it wasn't a good thing. It was like a person holding a pen, a cup, or other inanimate objects in their hand. They might be busy with other things and forget about the things in their hand. But if they were holding a cat or a rabbit in their hands, they wouldn't forget them no matter what they were doing. This was the difference between a living thing and an inanimate object. Living things had spirituality, so they naturally had a biological magnetic field that could be easily sensed. The reason why I couldn't sense the Qilin Gu wasn't because it didn't have enough spirituality. The only possibility was that it was stronger than me, or even stronger than the snake spirit. It was consciously hiding in my body, making the snake spirit and I unable to find it. Earlier, because of little Wang Li's matter, I had the thought of ignoring the threat of the Qilin Gu and breaking through to the Heavenly Master realm. My original thought was that since I was a dual witchcraft cultivator and had practiced the 9-star Heavenly Dipper, I would be stronger than an ordinary Heavenly Master. I also had the snake spirit and Tong Tong with me. Perhaps I would have a way to resist the Qilin Gu when it acted up. But at this moment I became cautious again. The power of the Qilin Gu might be much stronger than I had imagined. It wasn't a good idea to break through rashly. With this thought, I gradually calmed down and gave up on the idea of taking the risk to break through. Although the Qilin Gu was strong, there was still the sacrificial evil spirit. Since he had specifically told me about this, he would have a way to deal with it. For the time being, I pinned all my hopes on him. I shook my head and called back the snake spirit. I didn't think about this matter anymore and lay on the bed to sleep. Zhang Canwen and I had made an appointment to check on little Wang Li tomorrow, so I had to rest early today. The next morning, I got up at around 6 o'clock a.m. After washing up, I hurried to Zhang Canwen's room. Zhang Canwen had gotten up earlier than me. He was sitting cross-legged on the bed, casting a spell on little Wang Li in front of him. Little Wang Li was lying motionless on the crib. His entire body was wrapped in a strong aura of the Wei. At this time, Zhang Kanwen was holding the Yinyang Yama brush in his hand. He was chanting mysterious spells and drawing some patterns on little Wang Li. I had seen Zhang Kanwen nurture little Wang Li's body before. It was the same every time, so I didn't find it strange. I directly walked in. Seeing me, Zhang Kanwen didn't move. He just signaled me with his eyes. His hands didn't stop moving as he continued to cast a spell on little Wang Li's body. The spell he used was very magical. He drew something on little Wang Li's body like he was writing. Then, messy lines appeared in the air, hovering above little Wang Li's body. They faintly flashed with colorful lights. Little Wang Li, be good. Master will cast a spell for you. It'll be done soon. While casting the spell, Zhang Kanwen took the time to comfort little Wang Li while chanting the spell. My heart warmed when I saw that. Although this fellow had mentioned killing little Wang Li many times, he was actually like a gentle father. Perhaps he cared about little Wang Li more than I did. After a full half an hour, when the messy lines emitting colorful brilliance all fell and melted into little Wang Li's body, the spell casting finally ended. Zhang Kanwen withdrew his hand, wiped the sweat on his forehead, and let out a long sigh of relief. Brother Zhang, how is it? I hadn't said anything because I was afraid of disturbing Zhang Kanwen. Now I finally dared to speak. The situation isn't good. Zhang Kanwen shook his head with a wry smile. This spell was passed down by the ancestors of Mount One. I don't dare to say that it can heal the dead, but I've never seen a better effect in nurturing a person. Over the past few months, I've been using this method to nurture little Wang Li's body, hoping to dispel the evil aura coming from the pit so that little Wang Li's body can be stronger and hold on for a few more days. It might even be able to delay the arrival of the evil creature. Unfortunately, as you can see, I've been busy for a few months, but little Wang Li's condition hasn't improved at all. It seems that the situation is much more serious than I estimated. Listening to his words, my heart tightened. Zhang Kanwen was even more puzzled. After a moment of silence, he said with a wry smile, "It really doesn't make sense. That evil creature is still dormant and won't actively resist. How come it doesn't have any effect?" As Zhang Kanwen spoke, he shook his head, his voice tinged with bitterness. Could it be that I'm wrong? Every day, I exhaust my Tao energy, but it doesn't have any effect on that evil creature? Or is it because that evil creature's cultivation base is too strong, and my Tao energy isn't enough to affect it? At this moment, Zhang Kanwen was analyzing and muttering to himself as if no one else was around. However, his words reminded me of something. Last time, when the evil creature in little Wang Li's body temporarily descended, I was there and felt the evil creature's aura. Judging from the weak aura on Wang Li's body, the evil creature was indeed strong, but it wasn't strong enough that Zhang Kanwen couldn't shake it with his cultivation base. After all, the evil creature was still at the other end of the passage. What appeared on Wang Li's body was just a trace of its aura. With Zhang Kanwen's cultivation base, he should be able to deal with it easily. This was also the fundamental reason why Zhang Kanwen was confident that he could help little Wang Li get through the first two hurdles. What went wrong? Why didn't Zhang Kanwen's situation get better after working so hard for so many days? Instead, it got worse? I hesitated for a moment, and a vague idea popped up in my mind. There were only two types of sources that cultivators cultivated. One was the qi of the Wei, and the other was the qi of witchcraft. If Zhang Kanwen used his witchcraft energy to raise little Wang Li every day and there was no effect, could he try witchcraft energy? This wasn't an idea I came up with on the spur of the moment. Every power had a limit. Zhang Kanwen had been exhausting his own Tao energy every day for several months. When added together, the power of his Tao energy was terrifying. If there was still no effect, it could only be said that it wasn't that his Tao energy wasn't enough, but that his Tao energy was useless. In the world, there were only two kinds of sources. If Tao energy didn't work, then he could only try witchcraft energy. Brother Zhang, do you think it will be useful if I use my witchcraft energy to raise little Wang Li? I asked after some consideration. Hearing my words, Zhang Canwen was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted and blurted, "Yeah, why didn't I think of that? Maybe that evil creature's power is strange, and my Tao energy is useless against it. That's not right. If my Tao energy is useless against it, it might backfire and speed up its awakening." No wonder I felt that little Wang Li's condition didn't improve, but worsened. That must be it. Hurry up and try. As the saying goes, those closely involved can't see clearly. After I pointed out another possibility, Zhang Canwen seemed to have gone crazy and muttered to himself. Then, he didn't bother to listen to my reply and pulled me to sit on the bed. He asked me to try to use my shaman energy. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.